Charlotte Hayes had built an empire on discipline and distance. For 3 years, her executive assistant, Ethan Cole, had been invisible. The perfect employee who arrived before dawn and never asked for anything. Until today. When Ethan calmly announced he was leaving early for a date, something inside Charlotte snapped. She did the unthinkable. She followed him through the rain-soaked streets of Seattle, expecting to catch him with a secret lover. What she discovered instead would shatter everything she thought she knew about loyalty, sacrifice, and the man who had stood beside her all this time. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for a story that'll change how you see the people around you. The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday afternoon, turning Seattle's streets into rivers of gray. From her corner office on the 43rd floor of Hayes Global Logistics, Charlotte Hayes stood motionless at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city blur beneath the storm. Her reflection stared back at her, sharp blazer, hair pulled into a severe bun, expression carved from ice. She'd built this company from nothing. 15 years of calculated risks, ruthless negotiations, and an unwavering rule. Emotions were liabilities. People respected her. People feared her. Nobody questioned her. Which was exactly why what happened next felt like the ground shifting beneath her feet. "Ms. Hayes?" The voice was calm, measured, the same voice that had greeted her every morning for the past 3 years. Ethan Cole stood in her doorway, tablet in hand, looking exactly as he always did. Navy suit pressed to perfection, dark hair neatly combed, posture straight but not stiff. At 32, he had the kind of face that could disappear in a crowd, pleasant but unremarkable, with quiet brown eyes that never demanded attention. "The Bergman contract is on your desk for final review," Ethan continued, stepping into the office with his usual efficiency. "I flagged the liability clauses in Section 7. Legal suggests we push back on their indemnification language. I've drafted 3 alternative proposals, ranked by likelihood of acceptance." Charlotte nodded, not turning from the window. "The Singapore call?" "Rescheduled to Thursday at 6 a.m. I've already updated your calendar and sent briefing materials to your home server. Coffee will be ready at 5:30. "The Peterson issue?" "Resolved. He agreed to the pay cut, signed the new contract an hour ago." Charlotte finally turned to face him. This was their rhythm, had been for 1,095 days. Ethan anticipated problems before they became crises. He translated her clipped commands into action. He kept the chaos of running a $2 billion logistics empire from ever touching her. He was, in every measurable way, perfect, which was why what he said next felt like a record scratching to a halt. "I need to leave early today." Charlotte's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. "What?" "I need to leave at 4:30. Ethan's voice remained steady, professional. "I have an appointment." In 3 years, Ethan had never left early. He'd worked through holidays, weekends, his own birthday. The year before, during the Portland acquisition crisis, he'd slept on the office couch for 4 days straight. Charlotte had once asked him, casually, in passing, if he had family who celebrated Christmas. He'd simply said, "I'll be here," and changed the subject. Now he stood in her office, calmly requesting to leave 90 minutes early, and Charlotte felt something strange and uncomfortable twist in her chest. "An appointment," she repeated slowly. "Yes." "With who?" For the first time in 3 years, Ethan hesitated. It was barely noticeable. A half-second pause. A slight shift in his weight. But Charlotte Hayes had built a career on reading people, and she saw it. "It's personal," he said finally. The words hung in the air like smoke. "Personal." Charlotte felt her jaw tighten. "Personal." "Yes, ma'am." "You're aware we have the quarterly board presentation tomorrow morning." "The presentation is complete. I uploaded the final version to the shared drive 20 minutes ago. All slides are formatted, citations verified, financial projections triple-checked. Your talking points are on your desk with relevant statistics highlighted. The catering? Confirmed. Gluten-free options for Director Morrison, dairy-free for Director Chen, nothing with shellfish for Director Price's allergies. The backup projector is in the AV room, tested this morning. I've printed hard copies of all materials in case of technical failure. The conference room is booked from 7 a.m. to noon with a 30-minute buffer on both sides. Ethan's expression never changed. "Everything is handled, Ms. Hayes." Charlotte stared at him. She wanted to say no. The words sat on her tongue, ready to launch. She could simply refuse. He was her employee, after all. She paid him handsomely for his time, for his dedication, for his absolute reliability. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way he stood there, calm and unwavering, not asking permission so much as informing her of a decision already made. Maybe it was the faint shadow under his eyes she'd never noticed before. Or maybe it was simple, burning curiosity. In 3 years, Ethan Cole had been a perfect machine. Efficient, reliable, completely devoid of personal needs or wants. Now he was shattering that image with 3 simple words. "I have an appointment." "Fine," Charlotte heard herself say. 4:30. "Thank you, Ms. Hayes." Ethan turned to leave, and Charlotte watched him go with an unfamiliar sensation crawling up her spine. She told herself it was annoyance at the disruption to routine. She told herself she was concerned about tomorrow's presentation, even though she knew every word of it was flawless. She told herself a lot of things in the next 3 hours. None of them were true. At 4:27 p.m., Charlotte stood at her window again, watching the parking garage entrance 43 floors below. The rain had softened to a drizzle, painting the city in shades of gunmetal and slate. She shouldn't be doing this. She knew she shouldn't be doing this. But when Ethan's silver Honda emerged from the garage and merged into traffic, Charlotte grabbed her coat and headed for the elevator. The rational part of her brain, the part that had steered Hayes Global Logistics through hostile takeovers and market crashes, screamed that this was insane, inappropriate, a gross violation of privacy and professional boundaries. But there was another voice, quieter and more insistent, asking a question she couldn't ignore. Who is Ethan Cole meeting that matters more than this job? She told herself she needed to know if he was interviewing elsewhere, if a competitor was trying to poach her perfect assistant. That was reasonable. That was strategic. The lie felt thin even in her own mind. Charlotte's black Mercedes slid into traffic 3 cars behind Ethan's Honda. She'd never followed anyone before. The whole thing felt surreal, like watching herself in a movie where she didn't recognize the protagonist. Ethan drove carefully, signaling lane changes, stopping fully at yellow lights. He headed east, away from Seattle's business district, and into neighborhoods Charlotte rarely visited. The buildings grew shorter, the spaces between them wider. Corporate glass and steel gave way to brick storefronts with hand-painted signs. Charlotte's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. Where was he going? They passed a trendy wine bar, and Charlotte tensed, ready to see him pull over. He didn't. They passed an upscale French restaurant with valet parking. He drove past without slowing. The farther they went, the more the landscape changed. Chain coffee shops became mom-and-pop diners. Boutique fitness studios became laundromats. This wasn't the Seattle Charlotte knew, the Seattle of waterfront restaurants and penthouse views and $7 coffees. This was somewhere else entirely. Ethan's Honda slowed, then pulled into a small parking lot. Charlotte hung back, pulling into a drugstore across the street, heart hammering against her ribs for reasons she couldn't name. Through the rain-streaked windshield, she watched Ethan park and step out of his car. He straightened his tie, the same navy tie he'd worn to the office, then walked toward a small restaurant on the corner. Charlotte stared. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't trendy. It was a neighborhood pizza place with a red and white striped awning and a neon sign that flickered, Sal's Pizza and more. Yellow light spilled from the windows onto the wet sidewalk. Through the glass, she could see red vinyl booths and plastic tablecloths. This was where Ethan was going? This was the appointment that mattered more than staying late at the office? Charlotte turned off her engine. She sat in the Mercedes for a long moment, rain drumming on the roof, watching Ethan pause outside the restaurant door. He checked his watch, the same silver Timex he wore every day, not a Rolex or an Omega like the executives Charlotte usually dealt with, then pulled out his phone. He typed something quickly, smiled at the screen, and put it away. Then he stepped inside. Charlotte counted to 30, then 60. Then she grabbed her umbrella and crossed the street. The rational voice in her head had gone completely silent. She approached the restaurant slowly, staying to the side where the angle would hide her from inside. The windows were slightly fogged from the warmth within, but she could see through them clearly enough, and what she saw made her freeze mid-step. Ethan stood just inside the door, scanning the restaurant. His posture had changed. The rigid professionalism had melted into something looser, warmer. He smiled, really smiled, not the polite expression he wore at board meetings, and started walking toward a booth near the back. Charlotte shifted to get a better view, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. In the booth sat a small boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, with messy brown hair that stuck up in the back and a green t-shirt with a cartoon dinosaur on the front. He was hunched over a piece of paper, drawing something with intense concentration, his tongue poking out slightly from the corner of his mouth. Charlotte watched, unable to move, unable to breathe. The boy looked up, his face exploded into joy. "Dad!" The word punched through the glass, through the rain, through every assumption Charlotte had ever made about the man who had worked beside her for 3 years. Dad. The boy scrambled out of the booth, nearly tripping over his own feet, and ran across the restaurant. Ethan dropped to one knee just in time to catch him, and the boy threw his arms around his neck with the kind of fierce, uncomplicated love that Charlotte hadn't seen in years, maybe ever. Ethan hugged him back, laughing, actually laughing, a sound Charlotte had never heard in the office, and said something she couldn't hear through the glass. The boy nodded enthusiastically, still clinging to him, and Ethan ruffled his hair before standing and taking his hand. Together they walked back to the booth. Charlotte stood frozen on the sidewalk, rain beginning to soak through her coat, staring at a scene that made no sense. Ethan had a son. Ethan, who never mentioned family, who never displayed photos, who never took personal calls, who existed in Charlotte's world as a purely professional entity, had a son, and she had never known. Inside the restaurant, Ethan slid into the booth across from the boy. A waitress appeared, and Charlotte watched Ethan order without looking at the menu, clearly a regular. The boy was talking animatedly, his hands moving to illustrate some story, and Ethan leaned forward, giving him his complete attention. There was something in the way Ethan looked at the boy that Charlotte had never seen before. His whole face had changed. The careful neutrality he wore at the office had vanished, replaced by an openness that made him look younger. Vulnerable, real. The boy said something that made Ethan throw his head back and laugh again. Charlotte felt something crack inside her chest. She didn't know this man at all. For 3 years, she had seen Ethan Cole every single day. She knew how he took his coffee, black, no sugar. She knew he always used the stairs instead of the elevator. She knew he was left-handed, that he had a small scar on his right thumb, that he typed 90 words per minute without looking at the keyboard. She knew 1,000 tiny details about his professional existence, and she knew nothing, absolutely nothing, about who he was when he left her office at night. A couple walked past Charlotte, giving her a curious look as they headed into the restaurant. She barely noticed. Her eyes stayed locked on the booth where Ethan and his son sat. The waitress returned with 2 plates. Pizza for them both. Pepperoni for the boy, plain cheese for Ethan. The boy immediately grabbed a slice, cheese stretching as he lifted it. Ethan said something that made him pause, and the boy sheepishly grabbed a napkin first before taking an enormous bite. They ate and talked. The boy pulled out the drawing he'd been working on and showed it to Ethan, who studied it with the same serious attention he gave to Charlotte's acquisition strategies. Ethan said something that made the boy beam with pride, then carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Charlotte watched the simple gesture and felt a strange ache in her throat. When was the last time someone had kept something of hers because it mattered to them? The rain picked up again, and Charlotte finally stepped closer to the restaurant window, angling herself behind a support column where she could see without being easily seen. The boy was laughing now at something Ethan had said, trying not to spray his drink. Ethan reached over with a napkin, wiping soda from the boy's chin with practiced ease. The tenderness of the gesture hit Charlotte like a physical blow. This was the same man who had negotiated with the union last month with ice in his veins. The same man who had fired 3 underperforming managers without a flicker of emotion. The same man who had worked 18-hour days during the Tokyo expansion without a single complaint. But here, in this small pizza restaurant with vinyl booths and paper napkins, he was someone completely different. He was a father. Charlotte's phone buzzed. She glanced at it automatically. An email from the legal team about the Bergman contract. The world she knew, demanding her attention. She swiped the notification away without reading it. Inside the restaurant, a waitress approached the table carrying something with candles on it. Charlotte watched the boy's eyes go wide. And then the small restaurant erupted in an off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. Birthday. The boy, Ethan's son, was celebrating his birthday, and Ethan had left work early to be here for it. The waitress set down a small chocolate cake with 8 candles burning bright. The boy bounced in his seat with excitement, and Ethan leaned across the table to say something that made him pause and close his eyes. Making a wish. Charlotte watched the boy blow out the candles in one breath, watched Ethan clap and smile with unguarded joy, watched the two of them share the first slice of cake with the ease of a ritual performed countless times before. And suddenly, Charlotte understood something that made shame burn hot in her stomach. This wasn't a last-minute appointment. This was something Ethan had been planning, something that mattered, something more important than quarterly reports or board presentations or any of the 1,000 tasks Charlotte had piled on him over the years. This was his son's 8th birthday. And Charlotte, who prided herself on knowing everything about her company, about her employees, about maintaining control over every detail, had never even known this child existed, had never asked, had never wondered, had never seen Ethan as anything more than an extension of her own ambition. The rain soaked through her coat now, cold water running down her neck, but Charlotte couldn't move. She stood there watching a father and son share birthday cake in a small restaurant and felt the foundations of her carefully constructed world begin to shift. Inside, the boy said something that made Ethan's expression soften. He reached across the table and took his son's hand, holding it gently while he spoke. Charlotte couldn't hear the words, but she could see their effect. The way the boy's face grew serious, then thoughtful, then broke into a smile that could light up the darkest room. Whatever Ethan had said, it mattered. And Charlotte realized with sudden, crushing clarity that she had spent 3 years commanding a man's time without ever considering what that time cost him. Every late night at the office was a night away from this. Every weekend working through acquisitions was a weekend not spent with his son. Every holiday she'd casually mentioned needing him was a holiday this boy spent without his father. And Ethan had never complained, never argued, never even mentioned that someone at home might be waiting for him. He'd simply said, "Yes, Ms. Hayes," and done the work. Because that's what Charlotte demanded. Perfection. Dedication. Complete professional devotion. She'd gotten exactly what she asked for, and she'd never once questioned what it cost. The boy finished his cake and hopped out of the booth, running to what Charlotte assumed was the bathroom. Ethan watched him go with a small smile, then pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. Probably letting someone know they'd be home soon, Charlotte thought. A babysitter? A family member? Then Ethan did something that made Charlotte's breath catch. He opened his wallet and pulled out a small photo, worn at the edges from handling. Even from outside, Charlotte could see it was a picture of the boy. Younger, maybe 5 or 6, missing his front teeth, grinning at the camera with chocolate ice cream smeared on his face. Ethan looked at the photo for a long moment, his expression unguarded in a way Charlotte had never witnessed. Then he carefully tucked it back into his wallet, right before the boy came bounding back to the table. Charlotte's hands were shaking. She didn't know if it was from the cold or from the realization crashing over her in waves. Ethan carried that photo with him. Every day at the office, through every meeting and every crisis and every moment of professional perfection, he had that picture in his pocket, a reminder of what he was working for, of who waited for him at the end of each endless day. And Charlotte had never noticed, had never asked, had never seen him as anything more than an instrument of her own success. Inside the restaurant, Ethan was paying the bill now. The boy had climbed back into the booth and was carefully packing his birthday candles into a small paper bag, saving them, Charlotte realized. Treasuring something simple because his father had been there to celebrate with him. Charlotte should leave. She knew she should leave. This was already so far over every line of appropriate behavior that she didn't know how to categorize it. But she couldn't move. She stood in the rain, watching through the window as Ethan helped his son into his jacket, a slightly too big navy windbreaker with a sports logo on the back. The boy zipped it himself, proud of his independence, and Ethan nodded approval before standing and taking his hand again. They were leaving. Charlotte's heart jumped. She needed to go, needed to get back to her car before they saw her, before this deeply inappropriate surveillance was exposed. But as she turned to leave, she caught one more glimpse through the window. Ethan and his son were walking toward the door, and the boy was looking up at him with an expression of such complete trust and love that Charlotte felt something inside her crack clean through. That's what matters, she thought suddenly. That look, that moment. That's what he's been protecting this whole time. The door of the restaurant opened. Charlotte moved on instinct, stepping quickly behind a parked van, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. She pressed herself against the cold metal, hidden in shadow, as Ethan and his son emerged onto the rain-slicked sidewalk. "Can we go to the park tomorrow after school?" the boy was asking, his voice high and clear in the damp air. "We'll see, buddy," Ethan replied. "I might have to work late tomorrow." "You always work late." The words were matter-of-fact, without accusation, but Charlotte felt them like a knife between her ribs. "I know," Ethan said quietly, "but it's important work. It means I can take care of us." "I know." The boys swung their joined hands. "Ms. Hayes must be really important if you have to work so much." Charlotte's breath stopped. "She is," Ethan said. "But you know what?" "What?" "You're more important." The boy giggled. "I'm not important. I'm just a kid." "You're the most important person in the world." Ethan stopped walking and knelt down, right there on the wet sidewalk, bringing himself to eye level with his son. "Do you understand that? Everything I do, every single day, it's all for you." The boy threw his arms around Ethan's neck. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, Lucas." Lucas. The name settled into Charlotte's mind a real detail about a real person she'd never bothered to know existed. Ethan stood, taking Lucas's hand again, and they walked toward the parking lot. Charlotte waited until they'd driven away before emerging from behind the van, her legs shaking, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. She walked back to her Mercedes on autopilot, climbed inside, and sat in the driver's seat as rain drummed on the roof. For 3 years, she had believed Ethan worked for her. She had believed his dedication was about professional ambition, about career advancement, about being the best assistant in the business. But the truth was so much simpler and so much more profound. Ethan didn't work for Charlotte Hayes. He worked for Lucas. Every early morning and late night, every weekend and holiday, every ounce of perfection he delivered wasn't about impressing her or climbing some corporate ladder. It was about being able to afford birthday cakes at Sal's Pizza, about keeping a roof over his son's head, about being the father Lucas needed him to be. Charlotte gripped the steering wheel, staring through the rain-streaked windshield at nothing. She had built an empire on discipline and distance. She had succeeded by treating people as resources, as assets to be managed and optimized. She had prided herself on her ability to separate emotion from business, to make the hard calls that sentiment-driven executives couldn't stomach. And in doing so, she had completely missed the humanity of the person closest to her. Her phone buzzed again. Another email. The world demanding her attention, as it always did. But for the first time in 15 years, Charlotte Hayes sat in her car and ignored it. Instead, she thought about a small boy in a too-big windbreaker, carefully packing birthday candles into a paper bag. She thought about a father kneeling on wet pavement, telling his son he was the most important person in the world. She thought about a worn photograph carried every day in a wallet, a private talisman of what truly mattered. And she wondered, really wondered, when she had forgotten that behind every employee was a whole life she couldn't see. The rain fell harder. Charlotte started her car and drove home through the Seattle streets. But she couldn't shake the image of Ethan and Lucas sharing birthday cake, couldn't unhear those simple words. "You're the most important person in the world." When was the last time anyone had been important to Charlotte beyond what they could do for her company? When was the last time she had been important to someone beyond her title and her bank account? The questions followed her all the way home, through the lobby of her downtown high-rise, into the elevator that carried her to the 23rd floor, through the door of her empty penthouse apartment. She stood in her living room, all chrome and glass and expensive art that a decorator had chosen, and realized she didn't know the answer. Outside, Seattle glittered in the rain, 1,000 lit windows holding 1,000 lives she would never know. And somewhere in one of those windows, a father was probably tucking his son into bed, maybe reading him a story, maybe talking about the birthday he would remember forever because his dad had been there. Charlotte walked to her own window and pressed her hand against the cold glass. For the first time in her carefully controlled life, she felt truly alone. And she couldn't stop thinking about the way Ethan had smiled at his son, unguarded, genuine, full of a love so pure it made everything else look like dust. Tomorrow she would see him at the office, perfectly professional, completely composed, and she would know. She would know that behind the navy suit and the polite, "Yes, Miss Hayes," was a father who carried birthday candles in paper bags and worn photos in his wallet. A father who worked himself to exhaustion for someone who loved him unconditionally. A father who had looked at his son and said, "Everything I do is for you," and meant it with every cell in his body. Charlotte stood at her window long into the night, watching the rain fall on a city full of people whose lives she'd never considered. And something deep inside her, something she'd locked away so long ago she'd forgotten it existed, began to wake up. Charlotte didn't sleep that night. She lay in her king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling of her bedroom, where shadows from the city lights played across the white expanse, and all she could see was Lucas's face when he'd looked up at his father. That pure, uncomplicated joy. That absolute trust. At 3:47 a.m., she gave up pretending and went to her home office. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, but Charlotte sat with her back to it, opening her laptop with hands that still felt unsteady. She typed Ethan's name into the company database. The file that appeared was sparse. Date of hire? 3 years, 2 months, 17 days ago. Previous employment? Administrative assistant at a small accounting firm. Education? Bachelor's degree in business administration from Seattle Pacific University. Emergency contact Maria Cole, relationship listed as sister. No mention of a son. No mention of family beyond the sister. Charlotte clicked through to his benefits enrollment. Health insurance, employee plus 1 dependent. The dependent was listed only as L. Cole, minor child. L. Cole. Lucas Cole, 8 years old as of yesterday. Charlotte's fingers hovered over the keyboard. In the search bar, she almost typed his name, almost went looking for more information, but something stopped her. This was already too far. She'd followed him. Watched him through a restaurant window like some kind of stalker. Now she was digging through his personal records in the middle of the night. She closed the laptop with more force than necessary. Outside her window, the sky was beginning to lighten from black to deep purple. In 2 hours, Ethan would arrive at the office at 7:43 a.m., exactly as he did every morning. He would have coffee ready by 7:50. He would brief her on overnight emails by 8 o'clock. The day would unfold with its usual precision, and Charlotte would have to look him in the eye knowing what she'd done. The thought made her stomach turn. She showered, dressed in her usual armor of designer suit and heels, and arrived at the office before dawn. The building was empty except for the night security guard, who nodded as she passed. Charlotte took the elevator to the 43rd floor and walked through the silent halls to her corner office. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The Bergman contract on her desk, flagged with Ethan's precise annotations. The presentation materials for the board meeting, organized with color-coded tabs. A fresh legal pad positioned at the exact angle she preferred. Charlotte sat in her leather chair and swiveled to face the windows. The city was waking up below her, lights flickering on in office buildings, early commuters beginning their daily migrations. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably making breakfast for Lucas, getting him ready for school, being a father in the 2 hours before he had to become her assistant again. The thought sat in her chest like a stone. At 7:43 a.m. exactly, Charlotte heard the elevator chime. Footsteps in the hallway, steady and familiar. A pause at the coffee station, the sound of a cup being filled. Then Ethan appeared in her doorway, 2 cups in hand, wearing the same navy suit as yesterday, but a different tie. Burgundy today, with a subtle pattern. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice carrying its usual professional warmth. "You're in early." Charlotte accepted the coffee he offered, their fingers nearly touching on the transfer. "Couldn't sleep," she said, and heard the unusual honesty in her own voice. "Too much on my mind." The board meeting? Ethan moved to the small table by her window where he typically set up for their morning briefing. "Everything's ready, but I can do another review of the financial projections if you'd like. Make sure we've anticipated every question." "That's not necessary." Ethan glanced at her, and for a moment Charlotte wondered if he could see it on her face. The knowledge of what she'd done, where she'd been, what she'd witnessed. but his expression remained professionally neutral. I've compiled a list of likely concerns from each board member based on their previous patterns. Director Morrison will probably focus on the environmental impact disclosures. Director Chen tends to drill down on risk assessment methodology. Director Price. Ethan, Charlotte interrupted. How was your evening? The question hung in the air between them. Ethan's hands, which had been sorting through files, went still. My evening? Yes. Your appointment. I hope it went well. Something flickered across Ethan's face. Surprise, maybe, or wariness. It was fine. Thank you for asking. What kind of appointment was it? Now there was definitely caution in his eyes. Just personal business, Ms. Hayes. Nothing that affects my work. Charlotte set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. I'm not asking as your employer. I'm asking as someone who realizes she's worked beside you for 3 years and knows almost nothing about your life. Ethan studied her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. With respect, Ms. Hayes, you've never asked before. The words hit exactly as hard as they should have. You're right, Charlotte said quietly. I haven't. Silence settled over the office. Outside, the sun was fully up now, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was going to be a beautiful day, Charlotte thought distantly. The kind of October morning that made people remember why they loved Seattle, despite the rain. I should check on the boardroom setup, Ethan said finally, moving toward the door. Make sure the AV equipment. I know about Lucas. The name stopped Ethan mid-step. He turned slowly, his face carefully blank in a way that told Charlotte everything. I'm sorry? Your son, Lucas. He turned 8 yesterday. The silence that followed was different now, heavier, charged with something Charlotte couldn't quite name. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. How did you... He stopped, and Charlotte watched understanding dawn in his eyes. You followed me. It wasn't a question. Charlotte stood, unable to remain seated under the weight of his stare. Yes. To my son's birthday dinner. Yes. May I ask why? The question was asked in the same level tone Ethan might use to inquire about meeting schedules, but Charlotte heard the steel underneath. For the first time in 3 years, she was seeing something beyond the professional mask. A flash of anger, tightly controlled but unmistakably there. I don't have a good answer, Charlotte admitted. You asked to leave early, and I was curious. You've never asked for personal time before. I thought maybe you were interviewing somewhere else or meeting with a competitor or... She trailed off, hearing how absurd it all sounded, spoken aloud. So you followed me to a pizza restaurant and watched me have dinner with my son. Charlotte forced herself to meet his eyes. Yes. Ethan's hand gripped the edge of the door frame. That is incredibly inappropriate, Ms. Hayes. I know. It's a violation of my privacy. I know. If I did something like that to you, you'd fire me on the spot. I know. Charlotte took a breath. You have every right to be angry. I have no excuse for what I did. It was wrong, and I'm sorry. The apology felt foreign in her mouth. Charlotte Hayes didn't apologize. She made decisions and stood by them, but watching Ethan stand in her doorway with his professional composure cracking at the edges, she meant it more than she'd meant anything in a long time. Ethan looked away, his jaw working. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Did you speak to him, to Lucas? No, I stayed outside. He never saw me. A breath escaped Ethan that might have been relief. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, some of the anger had faded, replaced by something that looked almost like exhaustion. Why didn't you tell me? Charlotte asked. In 3 years, you never once mentioned you had a son. You never asked. That's not fair, isn't it? Ethan's eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. When have we ever had a conversation that wasn't about work, Ms. Hayes? When have you ever indicated that you saw me as anything other than your assistant? The truth of it stung like a slap. I keep my personal life separate because that's what this job requires, Ethan continued. You demand availability. You expect dedication. And I give you both, gladly, because this job allows me to provide for my son. But that doesn't mean you're entitled to know about him. You're right. Charlotte moved to the window, needing to look at something other than Ethan's face. You're absolutely right. I built this company on clear boundaries, professional distance, and I've benefited from your discretion more than I probably realize. Then why does it matter now? Charlotte turned back to face him. Because I saw you with him. I saw you be someone completely different than the person I see every day, and I realized I've spent 3 years treating you like a machine instead of a human being, and that's not the kind of leader I want to be. Ethan's expression shifted, surprise breaking through the anger. Ms. Hayes, how old was he when you started working here? Charlotte asked. A pause. 5. And before that? I was at the accounting firm. It paid less, but the hours were better, more predictable. Ethan's shoulders dropped slightly. But Lucas was starting school, and I needed better insurance, more stability. This job offered both. What about his mother? The question came out before Charlotte could stop it, and she immediately regretted the intrusion. But Ethan answered, his voice flat. She left when Lucas was 2, decided motherhood wasn't what she wanted. He met Charlotte's eyes. It's been just us since then. Charlotte felt something twist in her chest. I'm sorry. Don't be. We're better for it. Ethan's voice softened almost imperceptibly. Lucas he's everything to me. Everything I do, every hour I work, every sacrifice I make, it's all for him. Everything I do is for you. The words Ethan had spoken to Lucas on the rain-soaked sidewalk echoed in Charlotte's mind. The late nights, she said slowly, the weekends, the holidays. When I've asked you to stay, when I've piled on extra work, I chose to say yes, Ethan interrupted. You didn't force me. I needed this job, and I knew what it required. That was my decision. But what did it cost you? What did it cost Lucas? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Charlotte's throat tight. Sometimes he asks why I can't be at his school events like other parents. Sometimes he goes to bed before I get home. Sometimes I miss things I can't get back. He looked directly at Charlotte. But he has a home. He has food and clothes and good schools. He has birthday cakes at Sal's Pizza. He has stability. That matters more. Does it? The question escaped before Charlotte could filter it. I watched him look at you last night, Ethan. The way his face lit up when you walked in. He doesn't care about stability or good schools. He just wants his father. And he has me. There was steel in Ethan's voice now. Maybe not as much as either of us would like, but he has me. I'm there every morning. I'm there every night I can manage. I'm there for his birthday, for his baseball games when I can swap shifts, for parent-teacher conferences. I make it work. By sacrificing yourself. By doing what needs to be done. Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. You don't get to judge that, Ms. Hayes. Not when you benefit from every hour I pour into this company. The words landed like stones. Charlotte turned back to the window, shame burning in her stomach. He was right. She had no standing to judge the choices Ethan made when she'd created the conditions that required them. I'm not trying to judge you, she said quietly. I'm trying to understand. Because last night I realized I've been blind to something important. You're not just my assistant, Ethan. You're a father, a person with a whole life outside these walls. And I should have known that. I should have asked. Behind her, she heard Ethan take a breath. Why does it matter? Nothing's changed. I'm still going to be here at 7:43 tomorrow morning. I'm still going to do my job. Charlotte turned to face him. Because maybe something should change. Maybe I've been asking too much without realizing what it costs. I told you that was my choice. A choice you made because you need this salary to take care of your son. That's not really a choice, Ethan. That's coercion dressed up in professional language. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. Are you firing me? What? No. Charlotte stepped forward, genuinely alarmed. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. Then what are you saying? Charlotte ran a hand through her hair, disrupting the severe bun she'd styled that morning. I don't know exactly. I'm saying that I saw something last night that I can't unsee. I saw you be a father, and I saw how much Lucas loves you, and I realized that every time I've asked you to stay late or work a weekend, I've been taking you away from that. And maybe I need to be more conscious of that cost. Ms. Hayes, Charlotte. Ethan blinked. What? My name is Charlotte. You've worked for me for 3 years. You can use it. That wouldn't be appropriate. Neither was following you to your son's birthday dinner, but I did it anyway. Charlotte offered a small, rueful smile. I think we're past strict appropriateness at this point. Ethan stared at her, clearly trying to recalibrate the conversation. Ms. Hayes, Charlotte, I appreciate what you're trying to say, but you don't need to change anything. This arrangement works. I'm good at my job, you pay me well, and Lucas is taken care of. That's all that matters. Is it? Charlotte challenged. Because from what I saw last night, what matters to Lucas is having his father present, and what matters to you is being there for him. This job makes both of those things harder. This job makes both of those things possible, Ethan countered. Before I worked here, I was barely scraping by. I couldn't afford Lucas's school supplies. I was one emergency away from disaster. Now I have savings, I have insurance, I have security. Yes, I work long hours, but that's the trade-off for stability. What if it didn't have to be? Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Charlotte moved to her desk, pulling up her calendar on the computer screen. How many hours did you work last week? I don't estimate. Ethan was silent for a moment. 65, maybe 70. And the week before? Similar. Every week? Most weeks. Ethan's voice was cautious. What's your point? Charlotte turned the screen toward him. My point is that I've been treating your time as infinitely available because you've never pushed back. But that doesn't mean it's fair or sustainable. You have a son who needs you. Maybe we need to build that into how we work together. You're already letting me leave early today for the board meeting. That's not what I mean. Charlotte pulled up Ethan's file on the screen. You get 2 weeks of vacation per year. How much have you taken in the last 3 years? Ethan didn't answer. How much, Ethan? 3 days. Total. Charlotte's jaw tightened. 3 days in 3 years. You're accruing time you'll never use because the culture I've created doesn't allow for it. Nobody forced me. The expectations forced you. The unspoken rules. The fact that I've never taken a vacation either. So how could you? Charlotte shook her head. That's not leadership. That's just toxicity masquerading as dedication. Ethan stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Are you feeling all right? This doesn't sound like you. Maybe it should. Charlotte closed the file. Maybe I've been so focused on building an empire that I forgot empires are built by people. People with lives and families and needs beyond profit margins. With respect, Ms. Charlotte, this sounds like a crisis of conscience that might pass by tomorrow morning. Maybe it will, Charlotte admitted. But right now, in this moment, I'm looking at you and seeing someone who's drowning in work because I keep piling it on. And I'm asking myself what kind of person does that without ever considering the cost. Ethan leaned against the wall, his carefully constructed professional facade showing cracks. You want to know the truth? Yes, I'm tired. Yes, I miss time with Lucas. Yes, sometimes I resent the late nights and the weekends and the assumption that I'm always available. His voice dropped. But I also know how lucky I am to have this job. Do you know how many single fathers would kill for this salary, for this level of stability? That doesn't make it right. It makes it reality. Ethan pushed off from the wall. You're not responsible for my choices, Charlotte. I knew what this job required when I took it, and I'd make the same choice again because it means Lucas has what he needs. What about what he wants? Charlotte asked quietly. Does he ever ask about you? About why you work so much? Something painful crossed Ethan's face. Sometimes. What do you tell him? That I'm building a better future for us, that the work matters, that Ethan's voice caught slightly, that it won't always be this way. Do you believe that? The question hung between them. I have to, Ethan said finally. What's the alternative? Give up this job and go back to barely making rent? Watch Lucas lose opportunities because I couldn't provide for him? At least this way he has stability, he has options, he has a future. But does he have a father? Charlotte asked gently. I mean, really have you, not just see you in the mornings and maybe at bedtime. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. That's not fair. You're right, it's not. Nothing about this is fair. Charlotte moved closer. But I watched you with him last night, Ethan. I saw the way he looked at you, the way you lit up when you saw him. That matters. That's real. And I've been asking you to sacrifice it for spreadsheets and board meetings and my own ambition. Nobody put a gun to my head. No, just economic necessity, which is almost worse because it means you can't say no. Charlotte met his eyes. I'm trying to acknowledge that I've been complicit in a system that exploits your dedication, and maybe I can do something about it. Ethan shook his head slowly. You can't fix the fundamental reality of single parenthood with good intentions. I need this job. Lucas needs me to keep this job. That means meeting your expectations. What if my expectations change? They won't. Ethan's voice was tired now. You're having a moment of guilt because you saw something that made me human to you. But tomorrow, there will be a crisis, or a deadline, or a merger, and you'll need someone to stay late and handle it. And I'll say yes, because that's what this job requires. That's what it's always required. The cynicism in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. You're probably right, Charlotte admitted. Old habits are hard to break, but maybe I can try. Maybe we can find a better balance. Why? Ethan asked bluntly. Why do you suddenly care? Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, trying to find words for something she barely understood herself. Because I stood outside that restaurant last night and watched you be a father. Really watched you. And I saw something I haven't seen in, I don't know how long. Purpose. Love. Connection to something bigger than yourself. She paused. I've built a company worth billions. I have a corner office and a view of the city and more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And I watched you share pizza with your 8-year-old son and realized you have something I don't. Something I'm not sure I've ever had. What's that? Someone who lights up when you walk in the room just because it's you, not because of what you can do for them or what you represent, just you. Charlotte's voice softened. Lucas loves you, completely, unconditionally, and I think somewhere along the way, I forgot that kind of love exists. Ethan's expression shifted, the anger fading into something more complicated. Charlotte, I'm not asking you to be my friend, Charlotte said quickly, or my therapist. I'm just saying that seeing you with Lucas reminded me that there's more to life than quarterly earnings reports. And if I'm going to be the kind of leader I want to be, maybe I need to start recognizing that the people who work for me have lives that matter beyond these walls. The office fell silent. Outside, the city hummed with morning activity, cars honking, construction crews starting their shifts, the ordinary chaos of urban life. Inside, Charlotte and Ethan stood in the space between who they'd been and who they might become. He asks about you sometimes, Ethan said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Lucas? Yeah, he hears me on phone calls or sees me checking emails at night, and he asks about Ms. Hayes, asks if you're nice, if you're mean. Ethan smiled sadly. I always tell him you're fair, that you expect excellence, but you're not cruel, that you've given us opportunities we wouldn't have otherwise. What does he say to that? He asks if you have kids. I tell him I don't know. Ethan met Charlotte's eyes. Do you? No. Family? Not really. My parents passed years ago. No siblings. No. Charlotte trailed off, the emptiness of the answer settling over her like a weight. No one waiting for me to come home. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was my choice. I chose this company over everything else. Charlotte turned to look out at the city. I told myself it was worth it, that building something lasting mattered more than personal relationships, and maybe it does. I don't know anymore. Behind her, she heard Ethan move closer. For what it's worth, you've built something incredible. Hayes Global Logistics changed the industry. You should be proud. I am proud. Charlotte didn't turn around. But I'm also standing here at 43 years old realizing I have no one to share it with, no one who cares about me beyond what I can do for them professionally. And last night, watching you with Lucas, I wondered when I became so lonely and stopped noticing. The confession hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Charlotte, Ethan said gently, you don't know me well enough to know if this will help, but it's not too late. To build connections, to find balance, you're not as alone as you think. Charlotte laughed, but there was no humor in it. Aren't I? Look around, Ethan. This office is my life. This company is my identity. If I stripped all of that away, who would I even be? Maybe someone worth knowing. The simple words hit Charlotte harder than any business setback ever had. She turned to look at Ethan, this man she'd worked beside for 3 years without really seeing, and felt something crack open in her chest. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted quietly. "How to be a person instead of just a CEO. How to care about people instead of just managing them. I've spent so long keeping everyone at arm's length that I don't remember how to let anyone close." "Start small," Ethan suggested. "Start with recognizing that the people around you are human, that they have lives and struggles and joys beyond what you see in the office. Like you and Lucas. Like me and Lucas." Ethan's expression softened. "He really is everything to me. Every single thing I do is because of him." "I saw that." Charlotte's voice was thick. "When he ran to you in that restaurant, when you knelt down to hug him, when you looked at him like he was the center of your entire universe. I saw it, and it was the most real thing I've witnessed in longer than I can remember." They stood in silence for a moment, the morning sun streaming through the windows, bathing the office in golden light. "The board meeting starts in 2 hours," Ethan said finally, his voice returning to its professional tone. "I should finish the setup." "Ethan," he paused at the door, looking back. "Take the rest of the week off," Charlotte said. "After the presentation, spend time with Lucas. You said he wants to go to the park. Take him." "Charlotte, I can't. You have vacation days. Use them. That's not a request. It's an order from your boss." Ethan stared at her. "We have the Singapore call Thursday. I'll handle it. And the Portland team needs, I'll delegate it to someone else. The company won't fall apart if you take 3 days off, Ethan. We'll survive." Something vulnerable flickered across Ethan's face. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Charlotte smiled, and it felt strange on her face, genuine instead of practiced. "Go be with your son. Let me figure out how to run this company without exploiting your dedication." Ethan nodded slowly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. This is me trying to be less terrible. The bar is pretty low." That earned her a small smile, real, reaching his eyes in a way she'd never seen in the office. "You're not terrible, Charlotte. You're just focused." That's a diplomatic way of saying emotionally unavailable and workaholic. I would have said driven and ambitious. Same thing, different packaging. Charlotte gestured toward the door. "Go. Make sure the boardroom is perfect. Let's get through this presentation, and then you can have your life back for a few days." Ethan hesitated at the threshold. "Charlotte, what you saw last night, watching me with Lucas, I know. It was a violation of your privacy. I'm sorry." "That's not what I was going to say." Ethan met her eyes. "I was going to say that if it helps you remember that we're all human, that we all have people and things we care about beyond this company, then maybe some good came from it, even if the method was questionable." Charlotte felt her throat tighten. "I'll try to remember." "No promises, but I'll try." "That's all anyone can ask." After Ethan left, Charlotte sat at her desk and pulled up Lucas's photo from the benefits database. 8 years old. Birthday, October 15th. The grainy photo showed a boy with messy brown hair and a gap-toothed smile that looked exactly like his father's. She stared at that photo for a long time, thinking about the cost of ambition, the weight of loneliness, and the simple truth she'd witnessed in a small pizza restaurant. Love mattered more than profit margins. Family mattered more than success. And somewhere along the way to building an empire, she'd forgotten both. The board meeting loomed ahead. Charlotte Hayes, CEO, would deliver a flawless presentation. She would command the room with her usual authority. She would prove once again why she deserved her position at the top of this company. But underneath the armor, something had shifted, and for the first time in 15 years, Charlotte wondered if there might be more to life than winning. The board meeting went exactly as planned. Charlotte commanded the room with her usual precision, fielding questions about quarterly projections and market expansion with the kind of confidence that had made her a legend in the industry. Director Morrison raised concerns about environmental compliance. Director Chen drilled into risk assessment metrics. Director Price questioned the timeline for the Asian market rollout. Charlotte answered each one without hesitation, her voice steady, her data irrefutable. But somewhere in the middle of explaining supply chain optimization strategies, she glanced at Ethan standing against the wall with his tablet, ready to pull up any supporting document she might need. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Charlotte saw something she'd never noticed before. Ethan was exhausted, not just tired from late nights or early mornings, deeply, fundamentally exhausted in a way that went bone deep. The kind of weariness that came from years of running on empty, of pushing through because stopping wasn't an option. How had she never seen it before? The presentation continued. Charts appeared on the screen showing profit margins and growth trajectories, numbers that proved Hayes Global Logistics was thriving, expanding, dominating its sector. Numbers that meant Ethan had been working 70-hour weeks while raising a son alone. When the meeting finally ended 2 hours later, the board members filed out with handshakes and congratulations. Director Morrison stopped at the door, turning back to Charlotte with an approving nod. Excellent work as always, Charlotte. The environmental initiatives are particularly impressive. Shows real forward thinking. Thank you, Richard. Charlotte accepted the compliment with practiced grace. Ethan deserves credit for those projections. He compiled the data from our sustainability consultants and translated it into actionable strategies. Morrison glanced at Ethan with the mild surprise of someone noticing furniture had moved. Oh, well, good work, young man. Ethan nodded politely. Thank you, Director Morrison. After the last board member left, Charlotte turned to Ethan. You can go? I need to file the meeting minutes, and I'll handle it. Go home to your son. Ethan hesitated, clearly torn between professional obligation and personal desire. The Singapore call prep, I said I'll handle it. Charlotte's voice was firm, but not unkind. Take the rest of today and the next 3 days. I'll see you Monday morning. Charlotte, are you sure? Ethan, she met his eyes. When was the last time you picked Lucas up from school? The question caught him off guard. His after-school program usually. Today you're going to pick him up yourself. You're going to take him to that park he wants to visit. You're going to have dinner with him that doesn't involve you checking emails on your phone. Charlotte moved closer. You're going to remember what it feels like to be just a father, not an employee squeezing in parenthood around work. Something in Ethan's expression cracked. I don't know if I remember how. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Then figure it out, Charlotte said softly. You have 3 days. Use them. Ethan stood there for a long moment, and Charlotte could see him wrestling with years of conditioning that said leaving early was weakness, that dedication meant sacrifice, that putting family first was somehow unprofessional. Thank you, he finally said, his voice thick with an emotion Charlotte couldn't quite name. Don't thank me. Just go. Charlotte watched him gather his things and leave, moving with less of the rigid precision she was used to and more of the human uncertainty she'd glimpsed at the pizza restaurant. When the door closed behind him, she turned to face the empty conference room with its presentation materials still scattered across the table. She should feel triumphant. The board had approved her expansion plans. Hayes Global Logistics was positioned for another record-breaking quarter. Everything was proceeding exactly according to her vision. Instead, she felt hollow. Charlotte gathered the materials herself, something she never did, and carried them back to her office. The afternoon stretched ahead with meetings and calls and the endless demands of running a company. But for the first time in years, she found herself wondering what the point of it all was. Who was she building this empire for? Who would care when she was gone? The questions followed her through the rest of the day like shadows. At 6 p.m., when the office began to empty, Charlotte found herself at her window again, watching employees stream out of the building toward their lives, toward families and friends, and obligations that had nothing to do with profit margins. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably at that park with Lucas, maybe pushing him on a swing, maybe watching him climb on playground equipment with a father's mixture of pride and terror. Maybe just sitting on a bench talking about nothing important while the October sun painted everything gold. Charlotte pulled out her phone and stared at the screen. Her contact list was full of names, board members, investors, industry connections, people who could help her company grow. Not a single person she could call just to talk. Not one. The realization settled over her like a weight. She'd spent so long building walls that she'd forgotten how to build bridges. And now, at 43, she stood in her corner office overlooking a city full of people and felt more alone than she'd ever been. Her phone buzzed, an email from the Singapore office confirming Thursday's call. Charlotte stared at it, then made a decision that surprised her. She forwarded it to her VP of operations with instructions to handle the preliminary discussion. She'd join if needed, but they should take the lead. It was a small thing, barely worth noting, but it felt like a crack in the dam. Charlotte stayed at the office until nearly 9, not because she had to, but because going home to her empty penthouse felt unbearable. When she finally forced herself to leave, the building was dark and silent. The night security guard looked up in surprise. "Late night, Miss Hayes?" "Not as late as usual, Martin." Charlotte paused, realizing she'd worked in this building for 8 years and had never asked. "How's your family?" Martin blinked. "My family? You have kids, don't you? I remember seeing photos on your desk." "Oh, yes, ma'am. 3 daughters." Martin's face brightened with the same transformation Charlotte had seen in Ethan. "Oldest just started college. The twins are in high school now." "That must keep you busy." "It does." Martin pulled out his phone, eager to share. "This is Emma. She's studying engineering, and these 2 troublemakers are Sarah and Sophie." Charlotte looked at the photos of 3 young women with bright smiles and their father's kind eyes. "They're beautiful. You must be very proud." "Every single day." Martin put his phone away, looking at Charlotte with something approaching wonder. "You've never asked about them before." "I know. I should have." Charlotte managed a small smile. "I'm trying to do better." She left Martin looking confused but pleased and stepped out into the cool Seattle night. The city hummed around her, alive with possibility and connection and all the things she'd systematically excluded from her life. Charlotte drove home slowly, taking side streets instead of the highway. She passed restaurants full of people sharing meals, bars where laughter spilled onto sidewalks, apartment buildings where lights glowed warm in windows. Each one held lives she would never know, stories she would never hear, connections she would never make. Because she'd chosen this. Every single day for 15 years, she'd chosen the company over everything else. And the company had rewarded her with success and wealth and power. But it couldn't hug her back. It couldn't ask about her day. It couldn't love her. Charlotte pulled into her building's underground garage and sat in her car for a long moment before going up. The penthouse waited, immaculate and empty, exactly as she'd left it that morning, exactly as it always was. She poured herself a glass of wine she didn't want and stood at her window overlooking the city. Somewhere down there, Ethan was probably tucking Lucas into bed, maybe reading him a story, maybe listening to excited chatter about the park and playground and whatever small adventures had filled their afternoon. Charlotte wondered what that felt like, to come home to someone who'd been waiting for you, to have bedtime rituals and inside jokes and shared history that mattered more than business deals, to be needed for who you were, not what you could provide. The wine tasted bitter. Charlotte set it down and went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the darkness thinking about the choices that had led her here, to this moment of reckoning in an empty apartment. She'd wanted to prove she could succeed in a male-dominated industry. She'd wanted to build something lasting. She'd wanted to matter. And she'd achieved all of it. So why did victory taste like ash? The next morning, Charlotte arrived at the office at her usual time. The building felt strange without Ethan's presence, like a familiar song playing in the wrong key. She made her own coffee and checked her own emails and realized how much she'd come to depend on his quiet efficiency. But more than that, she realized how much his presence had filled a space in her days. Someone to brief, someone to delegate to, someone to share the burden of running a massive company, someone who was there. The day dragged. Charlotte handled the Singapore call herself and managed the Portland team's questions without incident. She was perfectly capable of running the company alone. She'd done it before hiring Ethan, but it felt different now, lonelier. At lunch, Charlotte did something she never did. She left the building and walked to a small cafe 3 blocks away. She ordered a sandwich and sat by the window watching people pass on the street. Mothers with strollers, students with backpacks, couples holding hands. An older man sat at the next table eating soup while reading a paperback novel. He looked content in a way Charlotte couldn't remember ever feeling. "Good book?" she asked, surprising herself. The man looked up, equally surprised to be addressed. "It is actually. Mystery novel. Nothing too serious, but it keeps me entertained." "Do you come here often?" "Every day for lunch." He smiled. "I'm retired now, so I make a point of getting out, meeting people. My wife says if I stayed home all day, I'd drive her crazy." Charlotte found herself smiling back. "How long have you been married?" 42 years next month." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. "Best decision I ever made asking her out. Changed my whole life." "That's beautiful." "It is." The man studied her with kind eyes. You married? No, never found the time. There's always time for the things that matter. He closed his book. I spent 30 years building a business, thought it was the most important thing in the world. Then I had a heart attack at 58, and you know what I realized? What? The business kept running without me, but my wife, she was the one who sat by my hospital bed. She was the one who mattered. He tapped his book. Now I read novels and have lunch at cafes and spend time with grandkids, and I'm happier than I ever was chasing success. The words hit Charlotte like a punch to the chest. Thank you, she managed. For what? For the perspective. The man nodded and went back to his book, leaving Charlotte to sit with the uncomfortable truth he'd just delivered. The business would keep running without her. It always did. She could be replaced by another ambitious executive, another driven CEO, another person willing to sacrifice everything for profit margins. But who would sit by her hospital bed? Who would she call in a crisis? Who would care if she disappeared tomorrow? Charlotte left the cafe with her sandwich barely touched and walked back to the office through the October sunshine. The city looked different somehow, less like a battlefield to be conquered and more like a place where people actually lived, where they loved and fought and raised children and built memories that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings. The afternoon passed in a blur of conference calls and contract reviews. Charlotte worked efficiently, making decisions and solving problems with her usual competence. But part of her mind kept drifting to Ethan and Lucas at the park, to that older man in his 42-year marriage, to the question she couldn't shake. What was the point of winning if you had no one to share it with? At 5 p.m., Charlotte's phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Charlotte Hayes? Ms. Hayes, this is Principal Anderson from Riverdale Elementary School. The woman's voice was professional but warm. I'm calling about Lucas Cole. Charlotte's heart stopped. Is he okay? Did something happen? Oh, he's fine. I'm sorry. I should have led with that. Principal Anderson laughed. I'm actually calling about Ethan. He came to pick up Lucas today, which he never does, and I just wanted to check in. Lucas was so excited to see his dad that he nearly knocked over another child running to meet him. Charlotte felt something loosen in her chest. That sounds like it went well then. It did. I've been principal here for 6 years, and I've never seen Ethan pick Lucas up. It's always the after-school program or his sister. I wanted to make sure everything was all right. Everything's fine, Charlotte said softly. I gave him some time off. He deserved it. Oh, that's wonderful. The genuine warmth in Anderson's voice made Charlotte smile. Lucas is such a sweet boy, but I know it's hard on him sometimes. Ethan works so much. Not that I'm judging. I know single parents do what they have to do, but it was lovely seeing them together today. Lucas was glowing. After the call ended, Charlotte sat at her desk staring at her phone. Lucas had been so excited to see his father that he'd nearly knocked someone over. That's what missing his dad looked like. That's what Ethan's 70-hour weeks cost. And Charlotte had been the one demanding those hours. She pulled up her company's HR policies and started reading. Parental leave, flexible scheduling, remote work options. The policies existed on paper, written by lawyers to meet legal requirements. But the culture she'd created made them unusable. No one took parental leave because it was career suicide. No one asked for flexible scheduling because it signaled lack of commitment. No one worked remotely because FaceTime mattered more than results. Charlotte had built all of that. Her standards, her expectations, her unspoken rules about what dedication looked like. And people like Ethan paid the price. She opened a new document and started typing. Policy changes, cultural shifts, real concrete actions that would make Hayes Global Logistics a place where people could have both careers and lives. It felt strange at first, foreign, like trying to write in a language she'd never learned. But as she worked through the afternoon, something unexpected happened. It felt right. By the time Charlotte looked up, it was past 8 p.m. The office was empty again, the building quiet. But she'd drafted a comprehensive proposal for restructuring how the company approached work-life balance. Flexible hours for parents, mandatory vacation minimums, remote work options, caps on evening emails, limits on weekend expectations. Things that should have been obvious. Things she'd been blind to because she'd never needed them herself. Charlotte saved the document and leaned back in her chair. Tomorrow she'd run it past her executive team. Some would resist. Change always faced resistance. But she was the CEO. Her word was law. And maybe it was time to use that power for something beyond profit. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number again, but this time she recognized it when she opened the message. It was Ethan. The text was simple. Thank you. Today mattered more than I can say. Attached was a photo. Ethan and Lucas at the park, the late afternoon sun painting everything gold. Lucas was mid-laugh, his arms spread wide like he was flying. Ethan was looking at him with such pure joy that Charlotte felt her throat tighten. This was what she'd given him. One afternoon, one chance to be just a father, and it had meant everything. Charlotte stared at the photo for a long time, then typed a response. You're welcome. Enjoy the rest of your time off. Monday can wait. She added, That's a beautiful photo. He looks happy. The response came quickly. He is. We both are. Charlotte set her phone down and turned to look out at the city. Lights were coming on across Seattle as evening settled in. People were finishing their workdays, heading home to families, to lives that existed beyond office walls. For 15 years, Charlotte had watched this transition from her window and felt superior. She was still working while others went home, still grinding while others rested, still building her empire while others settled for ordinary lives. Now she looked at those lights and wondered what she'd missed. How many dinners with people who mattered? How many conversations that went deeper than business? How many chances to connect with another human being in a way that was real and vulnerable and true? Charlotte pulled out her phone again and scrolled through her contacts, past the board members and investors and industry connections, all the way down to a name she hadn't called in years. Her college roommate, the one who'd sent Christmas cards Charlotte never answered, who'd invited her to weddings and baby showers Charlotte never attended, who tried to stay connected while Charlotte built her empire in isolation. Her finger hovered over the name. Then she pressed call. The phone rang 4 times before a cautious voice answered. Hello? Sarah, it's Charlotte. Charlotte Hayes. Silence. Then, Charlotte? Wow, I can't believe you're calling. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. Charlotte paused, searching for words. I realized I've been a terrible friend, and I wanted to change that. If it's not too late. Another pause. Then Sarah's voice came through, warmer now. It's never too late. Tell me what's going on with you. They talked for an hour. Sarah told her about her 3 kids and her husband who taught high school and their lives in Portland. She asked about Charlotte's company with genuine interest, but also asked about Charlotte herself, questions no one had asked in years. Are you happy? Are you lonely? Do you ever regret your choices? Charlotte answered honestly, more honestly than she'd been with anyone in longer than she could remember. And Sarah listened without judgment, offering perspective from a life lived differently. You know what I think? Sarah said finally. I think you're having a moment of clarity. The question is what you do with it. Do you go back to business as usual, or do you actually change? I don't know if I know how to change. Nobody does. That's what makes it hard. Sarah's voice was kind. But Charlotte, you're one of the smartest people I've ever met. If you want to build a different kind of life, you will. You just have to decide it matters as much as your company does. After they hung up with promises to stay in touch this time, Charlotte sat in her office feeling lighter than she had in years. One conversation, one bridge rebuilt. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She looked at the photo Ethan had sent one more time. Lucas mid-laugh, Ethan transformed by joy. A moment of pure connection captured in pixels. This was what mattered. Not the Singapore expansion, or the Portland contracts, or the quarterly earnings reports. This. Love. Connection. Being present for the people who needed you. Charlotte saved the photo to her phone, even though she had no right to keep it. Then she shut down her computer and left the office earlier than she had in months. The night security guard looked up in surprise as she passed. Have a good evening, Ms. Hayes. You too, Martin. Tell your daughters I said hello. Especially Emma. Engineering is a great field. Martin's face lit up with genuine pleasure. I will. Thank you. Charlotte stepped out into the October night and breathed in the cool air. The city sprawled before her, alive with possibility. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably reading Lucas a bedtime story. Sarah was probably helping her kids with homework. That older man from the cafe was probably sitting with his wife of 42 years. And Charlotte was standing alone on a sidewalk, looking at a world she'd never fully participated in. But maybe that could change. Maybe she could learn to build something besides an empire. Maybe she could remember how to be human. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Charlotte pulled her coat tighter and started walking toward her car. Tomorrow she'd present her policy changes to the executive team. She'd start reshaping the culture of Hayes Global Logistics into something more humane. She'd use her power to make space for people like Ethan to have lives beyond their job descriptions. And maybe, slowly, she'd figure out how to build a life of her own. One that included more than corner offices and quarterly reports. One that might, someday, include someone who lit up when she walked in the room. Charlotte drove home through the Seattle streets thinking about second chances and new beginnings. About the cost of ambition and the value of connection. About 8-year-old boys who glowed when their fathers picked them up from school. The penthouse was still empty when she arrived, but somehow it felt less lonely than before. Because Charlotte Hayes, CEO of Hayes Global Logistics, builder of empires and conqueror of markets, had finally learned something more important than any business strategy. Success without someone to share it with wasn't success at all. It was just expensive loneliness. And she was done being lonely. The weekend passed slowly for Charlotte. Saturday morning, she woke early out of habit, reached for her phone to check emails, then stopped herself. Instead, she made coffee and sat by her window watching Seattle come alive beneath a blanket of fog. She thought about calling Sarah again, but it was too soon. One conversation didn't rebuild a friendship. She needed to give it time, let it grow naturally instead of forcing it like she forced everything else in her life. By noon, the silence of the penthouse had become oppressive. Charlotte found herself wondering what Ethan and Lucas were doing. Maybe at a museum. Maybe playing soccer in their backyard if they had one. Maybe just watching cartoons on the couch, Lucas tucked against his father's side. The image made her chest ache. Sunday was worse. Charlotte tried to work but couldn't focus. She went to the gym in her building and ran on the treadmill until her legs burned, trying to outpace thoughts that wouldn't leave her alone. She showered and dressed and stood in her living room with absolutely nothing to do. No meetings, no calls, no crises demanding her attention, just empty hours stretching ahead. This was what normal people did on weekends, she realized. They had time. They filled it with family and hobbies and rest. Things Charlotte had trained herself not to need. But now the absence of those things felt like a hole she couldn't fill. She ended up back at her window as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the city, families were having Sunday dinners. Friends were meeting for drinks. Couples were cooking together in small kitchens, arguing over recipes and laughing at private jokes. Charlotte had none of it. She'd built an empire and forgotten to build a life. Monday morning arrived with relief. Charlotte dressed in her usual armor, tailored suit, severe bun, expression that revealed nothing. She arrived at the office at 7, ready to reclaim her familiar routine. Ethan was already there. He looked different somehow. Rested, maybe. Or just lighter, like he'd set down a weight he'd been carrying too long. He had coffee ready and a briefing document prepared, but there was something new in his posture, less rigid, more present. "Good morning, Charlotte." The use of her first name still felt strange, but not unwelcome. "Good morning. How was your time off?" Ethan's face transformed with a smile that made him look years younger. "It was perfect. We went to the science center, the zoo, the park 3 different times. Lucas barely let me sit down. I forgot how much energy 8-year-olds have." "Sounds exhausting." "It was. Best kind of exhaustion, though." Ethan set a file on her desk. "I also had time to think about what you said, about balance and priorities, and I wanted to thank you properly. Those 3 days reminded me why I do this job, what it's all for." Charlotte opened the file, expecting a work document. Instead, she found a simple piece of paper with a crayon drawing. 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands under a yellow sun. "Lucas drew this?" she asked softly. "Friday night. He wanted you to have it. Said you must be lonely working all the time if you don't have any kids." Ethan's voice was gentle. "Out of the mouths of children, right?" Charlotte stared at the drawing, her throat suddenly tight. A child's assessment of her life, rendered in crayon in innocent honesty. The tall stick figure stood alone except for the small one beside it. No one else in the picture, just empty space where a life should be. "It's very sweet," Charlotte managed. "Tell him thank you." "You can tell him yourself if you want. He asked if he could meet you sometime. I told him maybe, but it would be up to you." The offer hung in the air between them. Charlotte looked up from the drawing to meet Ethan's eyes, searching for judgment or manipulation. She found neither. Just a father extending an invitation, genuine and without expectation. "I'd like that," Charlotte heard herself say. "When would work?" Ethan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Really?" "Really, if it's appropriate. I don't want to overstep." "You followed me to his birthday dinner. I think we're past worrying about overstepping." Ethan's smile took the edge off the words. "How about lunch this week? There's a cafe near his school. I sometimes meet him there on half days. Wednesday is early release." Wednesday works. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, both seeming to realize they'd crossed another line in the shifting boundaries of their relationship. Professional distance was becoming something else, something neither of them quite knew how to navigate. "I should mention," Ethan said finally, "I got an email Friday from your executive assistant. Well, your other executive assistant. Jennifer? She said you drafted some policy changes and wanted me to review them before the leadership meeting." Charlotte had forgotten about that email. "Right, the work-life balance proposals. I'd value your input since you're the one most affected by current policies." "I read through them this weekend." Ethan pulled out his tablet. "Charlotte, these changes they're significant. Mandatory vacation minimums, flexible scheduling for parents, caps on after-hours communication. Your executive team is going to push back hard." "Let them. You're talking about fundamentally changing company culture. That's not something you can mandate from the top. It requires buy-in at every level." "Then I'll get buy-in." Charlotte moved to her desk, all business now. "I'm the CEO. I set the tone. If I make it clear that these policies aren't suggestions but expectations, people will adapt. Or they'll pay lip service while maintaining the same toxic patterns." Ethan's voice was careful but firm. "I've seen it happen. Companies announce family-friendly policies, then quietly punish anyone who uses them. You need more than a memo, Charlotte. You need real cultural change." "What do you suggest?" Ethan seemed surprised to be asked. He thought for a moment, then set his tablet on her desk. "Start with modeling the behavior yourself. If you're sending emails at midnight, everyone else will too, policies be damned. If you never take vacation, neither will anyone else. You need to show that balance is possible, not just permitted." The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Charlotte had built a culture of overwork by example. She was always first in, last out, constantly available, perpetually grinding. How could she expect others to change when she wouldn't? "You're right," she admitted. "I need to practice what I'm preaching." "It's more than that." Ethan pulled up his notes. "These policies are good, but they're reactive. They address symptoms without fixing the root problem." "Which is?" "You've built a company where people's value is measured by their availability instead of their output, where FaceTime matters more than results, where working 70 hours a week is seen as dedication rather than dysfunction." Ethan met her eyes. "That culture came from the top. It has to change from the top too." Charlotte absorbed the critique, which was really an indictment of everything she'd built. "So I need to restructure how we measure success, and reward it, and promote based on it. You need to show that people can advance their careers while having boundaries. Right now, the implicit message is that anyone serious about success sacrifices everything else." Ethan's voice softened. "I've been living that message for 3 years. It's unsustainable." "Why didn't you say something before?" "Because I needed this job. Because I couldn't risk being seen as uncommitted. Because the culture you created made it impossible to ask for what I needed without looking weak." Ethan paused. "I'm only saying this now because you gave me 3 days off and the world didn't end. That showed me maybe things could be different." Charlotte moved to the window, her usual refuge when conversations got too real. "I never meant to create an environment where people felt trapped." "I know, but intent doesn't change impact." Ethan joined her at the window, both of them looking out at the city. "You're brilliant at business, Charlotte. You built something remarkable. But you built it by sacrificing everything else, and you expected everyone around you to do the same. That worked for you because you didn't have anything else to sacrifice. But people like me, we have sons and daughters and lives that matter beyond quarterly earnings. I'm trying to fix that. I know you are. And these policies are a start. But real change requires vulnerability. It requires you admitting that maybe the way you've been doing things isn't the only way. Maybe isn't even the best way. Charlotte turned to face him. You're asking me to acknowledge that I've been wrong about balance, about leadership, about what actually matters. I'm asking you to be human instead of a machine. Ethan's voice was gentle. You're allowed to want more than work, Charlotte. You're allowed to need connection and rest and purpose beyond profit margins. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. The words hit something deep inside Charlotte, a place she'd locked away so long ago she'd forgotten it existed. Tears pricked at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back hard. I don't know how to be real, she whispered. I've spent so long being the CEO that I don't know who I am without it. Then maybe it's time to find out. They stood at the window in silence, the morning sun streaming through the glass, warming them both. Below, the city rushed through another Monday morning, millions of people pursuing their own versions of success and meaning. The leadership meeting is at 2, Charlotte said finally, her voice steady again. I'm presenting these policy changes whether the executive team likes it or not. Will you be there? Do you want me to be? Yes. They need to hear from someone who's lived the consequences of our current culture, someone who can speak to why change matters. Ethan nodded slowly. I can do that. But Charlotte, be prepared for resistance. Some of your executives have built their careers on the current model. They're not going to welcome change that challenges their worldview. Let them resist. I'm still the one who signs their paychecks. A small smile crossed Ethan's face. There's the Charlotte Hayes I know, steel wrapped in expensive suits. I'm working on adding some humanity to the package. I've noticed. It suits you. The moment hung between them, charged with something neither quite wanted to examine. Then Ethan cleared his throat and stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself. I should let you prepare for the day. The marketing team wants 30 minutes at 9 to discuss the rebrand campaign, and legal needs sign-off on the revised Bergman contract. Right, back to reality. Reality doesn't have to be all bad. Ethan headed for the door, then paused. Wednesday at noon. The cafe is called Rosie's, 2 blocks from Riverdale Elementary. Lucas gets out at 11:45. I'll be there. After Ethan left, Charlotte sat at her desk and looked at Lucas's drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. Simple. Honest. The kind of connection a child understood instinctively. The kind Charlotte had forgotten how to create. She carefully slid the drawing into her desk drawer, next to the proposal for policy changes that would reshape her company. 2 symbols of the transformation she was attempting. One professional, one deeply personal, both terrifying in their implications. The morning passed in its usual rhythm of meetings and decisions and putting out small fires. But Charlotte found herself watching her executives differently now, seeing them through the lens Ethan had provided. How many of them were like him, grinding through exhaustion because the culture demanded it? How many had families they barely saw? Hobbies they'd abandoned, lives that existed only in the margins of their work? At 2 p.m., Charlotte walked into the conference room where her executive team waited. 10 people who ran different divisions of Hayes Global Logistics, all of them successful by conventional metrics, all of them looking slightly wary. They sensed something was different. Charlotte took her seat at the head of the table and pulled up her presentation. Thank you all for being here. I want to discuss some significant changes to company policy. More expansion plans? Asked Marcus Chen, her VP of Operations, eager as always. No, this is about how we work, not what we work on. Charlotte clicked to the first slide. I've drafted a comprehensive proposal to restructure our approach to work-life balance. The room went very still. Work-life balance? Repeated Jennifer Morales, the CFO, her tone carefully neutral. Yes. I've been reviewing our employee retention data, exit interview feedback, and industry trends. We have a problem. Charlotte clicked through slides showing turnover rates, burnout statistics, and comparative data from competitors. We're hemorrhaging talented people because we've created an unsustainable culture. Our culture is what makes us successful, countered David Price, VP of Sales. We outwork the competition. That's our competitive advantage. Is it? Or is it just what we tell ourselves to justify dysfunction? Charlotte met his eyes. When was the last time you took a full vacation, David? Price shifted uncomfortably. I take time off. When? Your file shows you've taken 4 days in 2 years. I prefer to stay engaged. You prefer to maintain the appearance of dedication because that's what this culture rewards. Charlotte's voice was firm, but not unkind. And you're not alone. Across this company, we have people working themselves to the breaking point because we've made it clear that anything less is unacceptable. With respect, Charlotte, Jennifer said carefully, this company didn't become successful by coddling people. We hire ambitious professionals who understand the demands of the industry. And then we burn them out and replace them. Look at the data. Charlotte clicked to retention statistics. Our average employee tenure is 18 months. Industry standard is 4 years. We're spending millions on recruitment and training to replace people we could have retained with better policies. Marcus leaned forward, interested despite himself. What kind of policies? Charlotte walked through her proposal point by point. Flexible scheduling for parents and caregivers. Mandatory vacation minimums that actually got enforced. Caps on after-hours emails and weekend work expectations. Results-based performance metrics instead of FaceTime measurements. The resistance built with each slide. This would completely change how we operate, David said flatly. Yes, it would. That's the point. We'd lose our edge. Competitors would outpace us. Or we'd attract and retain better talent because we offer something they don't. Balance, humanity. The recognition that our employees have lives beyond these walls. Jennifer's expression was skeptical. This sounds like idealism, not business strategy. Our shareholders care about results, not employee satisfaction surveys. Our shareholders should care about both. Charlotte pulled up financial projections. Conservative estimates show that reducing turnover by even 20% would save us $7 million annually in recruitment and training costs. Improved employee satisfaction correlates with better performance metrics. This isn't charity, Jennifer. It's smart business. It's also a fundamental shift in company identity, Marcus said. Hayes Global Logistics is known for being aggressive, hungry, always pushing. You're talking about softening that image. I'm talking about evolving it. Being aggressive doesn't require being inhumane. The room fell silent. Charlotte could feel their resistance, their skepticism, their fear of change. These were people who'd succeeded in the system as it existed. Change threatened that success. I'd like to share a perspective, Ethan said quietly from his position by the wall. All eyes turned to him. Executive team members rarely paid attention to assistants in these meetings. Ethan was furniture, a note-taker, background noise. Now he stepped forward, and Charlotte saw him transform. The quiet assistant became something else. A father. A human being with something to say. I've worked here for 3 years, Ethan began, his voice steady. In that time, I've missed my son's school plays, his baseball games, his science fair. I've missed bedtimes and breakfasts and the 1,000 small moments that make up a childhood. I've done this because the culture here made it clear that dedication meant availability, that success meant sacrifice. David opened his mouth to respond, but Ethan continued. Last week, Charlotte gave me 3 days off. 3 days to just be a father. And you know what happened? The company didn't collapse. The work got done. But I got to pick my son up from school and watch his face light up because for once, I was there. Ethan's voice thickened with emotion. That's what these policies are about. Not coddling, not lowering standards, just recognizing that the people who work here are human beings with lives that matter. That's very touching, Jennifer said, her tone suggesting it wasn't. But emotional appeals don't change business realities. We have shareholders to answer to, metrics to hit, competitors to beat. And we have employees who are barely holding it together, Ethan shot back. You want to talk metrics? Talk to HR about stress-related insurance claims. About the people who quit without warning because they can't take it anymore. About the talent you lose to companies that actually value balance. Enough. Charlotte's voice cut through the rising tension. This isn't a debate. I'm not asking for your permission to implement these changes. I'm informing you that they're happening. The question is whether you're on board or not." The room went very still. This was Charlotte as they knew her, decisive, authoritative, brooking no dissent. But the content of her decision was completely foreign to the culture she'd built. "What if we're not on board?" David asked quietly. "Then you're welcome to find employment elsewhere. But these changes are happening with or without your support." Charlotte met each executive's eyes in turn. "I built this company by demanding everything from everyone, including myself. And it worked, by conventional measures. We're profitable and growing and successful, but we're also burning through people like they're disposable. And I'm done pretending that's acceptable." "Since when do you care about being acceptable?" Jennifer's voice had an edge now. "Since I realized that success without humanity is just expensive loneliness." Charlotte's voice softened. "I've spent 15 years building this company and forgetting to build a life. I've demanded the same from all of you, and I'm telling you now that it was wrong. We can be successful and humane. We can hit our numbers and respect our people. But it requires changing how we think about work." Marcus was the first to speak into the silence that followed. "If we implement these policies, how do we measure effectiveness? How do we know if it's working?" Charlotte felt a flicker of hope. Marcus was engaging with the idea instead of rejecting it outright. "We track retention rates, employee satisfaction scores, productivity metrics, and financial performance. We establish baselines and measure progress quarterly. And if the numbers don't improve, then we adjust. This isn't religion, Marcus. It's an experiment based on data and best practices from companies that have successfully implemented similar changes." Charlotte pulled up case studies. Tech companies, consulting firms, even other logistics companies have proven that balance and success aren't mutually exclusive. The meeting continued for another hour, resistance slowly giving way to cautious engagement. Not everyone was convinced. Jennifer remained skeptical, David openly hostile, but enough executives saw the potential value to move forward. When the meeting finally ended, the executive team filed out in small groups, talking in low voices. Ethan lingered, waiting until the room cleared. "That was harder than I expected," Charlotte admitted. "Change always is, especially when it challenges people's core assumptions." Ethan moved to the window. "But you did it. You stood up there and told your entire leadership team that the way you've been doing things is wrong. That takes courage. Or stupidity. I might have just alienated half my executive team. You gave them a choice, evolve or leave. That's leadership." Charlotte joined him at the window. "Did I go too far, threatening their jobs if they don't support this?" "You didn't threaten their jobs. You clarified your expectations." Ethan turned to face her. "These policies will only work if leadership models them. If your executives keep grinding through weekends and sending midnight emails, nothing changes. You needed to make it clear that's not acceptable anymore." "I've never been good at leading with anything but authority." "Then learn. You're smart enough." Ethan's expression was gentle, and for what it's worth, you did something important today. You acknowledged that you were wrong. That's rare in a CEO. It feels vulnerable. That's because it is. But vulnerability isn't weakness, Charlotte. It's honesty. And your people will respect you more for it, even if they resist the changes. Charlotte looked out at the city, thinking about vulnerability and honesty and all the things she'd taught herself not to show. "Wednesday at noon," she said softly. "I'm nervous about meeting Lucas." "Why?" "Because what if he doesn't like me? What if I don't know how to talk to an 8-year-old? What if I say something wrong and—" "Charlotte." Ethan's hand landed gently on her shoulder, the first time he'd ever touched her outside of professional handshakes. "Lucas is 8. He likes dinosaurs and soccer and telling terrible jokes he learned from his friends. Just be present and genuine, and he'll like you fine." "What if I'm not good at being genuine?" "Then practice. Start small. Wednesday is just lunch with a kid who drew you a picture. Not a board meeting, not a negotiation, just a conversation." Charlotte nodded, not trusting her voice. The weight of Ethan's hand on her shoulder felt like an anchor, grounding her in a moment of simple human connection. How long had it been since someone touched her without agenda or expectation? She couldn't remember. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled. "Lucas's school, probably reminding me about early dismissal Wednesday." "You're a good father," Charlotte said quietly. I'm trying to be. That's all anyone can do. Ethan moved toward the door. Go home early tonight. Model the behavior you want to see. I have work. It'll be there tomorrow. Go home, Charlotte. Order takeout. Watch something mindless. Remember what it's like to have an evening that isn't about productivity. After Ethan left, Charlotte sat alone in the conference room for a long time, thinking about courage and vulnerability and 8-year-old boys who drew stick figures holding hands, about executives who resisted change and fathers who missed bedtimes and CEOs who'd forgotten how to be human, about the enormous gap between knowing something needed to change and actually having the courage to change it. At 6 p.m., Charlotte did something she'd never done. She closed her laptop, turned off her phone's work email, and left the office. Martin, the security guard, looked up in surprise. Early night, Ms. Hayes. Trying something new, Martin. How are your daughters? Oh, good. Emma aced her first engineering exam. The twins are driving me crazy with college visits. Charlotte smiled, and this time it felt natural. Sounds like you have your hands full. Best kind of full. Martin's expression was warm. You have a good evening, Ms. Hayes. Charlotte drove home slowly, taking surface streets again instead of the highway. The city was beautiful in the early evening light, all gold and shadow. She ordered Thai food and sat by her window eating pad Thai straight from the container, watching Seattle transition from day to night. It felt strange, wrong, almost, like playing hooky from school, but it also felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Charlotte's phone buzzed with a text. Sarah, her college friend. Hey, just checking in. How was your week? Charlotte stared at the message, then typed back. Challenging, trying to change some things at work. Harder than expected. The response came quickly. Change always is. Proud of you for trying, though. They texted back and forth for 20 minutes, Sarah sharing stories about her kids' latest adventures, Charlotte tentatively opening up about the policy changes, and her fears about implementation. It was surface-level connection, but it was connection nonetheless. More than she'd had in years. When Charlotte finally went to bed that night, she lay in the darkness thinking about Wednesday, about meeting Lucas, about trying to be genuine with an 8-year-old who'd seen through her loneliness with the clarity only children possessed, about the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could build something more than an empire. Maybe she could build a life. Wednesday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine breaking through Seattle's typical October gray. Charlotte changed her outfit 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a soft cashmere sweater. Professional enough to feel like herself, casual enough not to intimidate an 8-year-old. She caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. When had she last worn jeans to anything? When had she last cared what a child thought of her? The morning crawled by. Charlotte tried to focus on a contract review but found herself checking the clock every 10 minutes. At 11:30, she stood and grabbed her coat. I'm heading out, she told Ethan, who looked up from his desk with an encouraging smile. Rosie's Cafe, 2 blocks east of the school. You can't miss it. Yellow awning, smells like fresh bread. What if I say something wrong? What if... Charlotte. Ethan stood and moved closer. He's 8, just be yourself. Well, maybe a slightly less intimidating version of yourself. I don't know how to be less intimidating. Start by smiling. You have a nice smile when you use it. Charlotte felt heat rise to her cheeks. I smile. At spreadsheets, maybe. Try it on humans sometime. Ethan's tone was teasing but kind. You'll do fine. Lucas is excited to meet you. He's been talking about it since I told him. What did you tell him about me? The truth. That you're my boss, that you're very smart and work very hard, and that you're trying to be a better person. Ethan met her eyes. That last part impressed him. He said anyone trying to be better must be pretty brave. The simple observation from a child she'd never met landed with unexpected weight. Charlotte nodded, not trusting her voice, and left before her courage could fail. Rosie's Cafe sat on a quiet corner 2 blocks from Riverdale Elementary, exactly as Ethan had described. The yellow awning was cheerful against the brick building, and the scent of fresh bread and coffee drifted out every time the door opened. Through the window, Charlotte could see worn wooden tables, mismatched chairs, and walls covered in children's artwork. It was nothing like the sleek restaurants Charlotte usually frequented. It was perfect. Charlotte ordered coffee and sat at a corner table where she could see the door. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around the warm mug. This was ridiculous. She'd negotiated with Fortune 500 CEOs, presented to hostile boards, stared down union representatives without flinching. But the thought of meeting an 8-year-old boy terrified her. At 11:52, the door opened and Ethan walked in holding Lucas's hand. The boy looked just like his photo, messy brown hair that stuck up and back, bright, curious eyes, a backpack nearly as big as he was. He wore a blue t-shirt with a rocket ship on it and sneakers that lit up when he walked. When he spotted Charlotte, his face split into a grin that could light up the darkest room. "Is that her, Dad? Is that Ms. Hayes?" Ethan nodded, and Lucas immediately pulled free and ran to Charlotte's table with the fearless enthusiasm only children possessed. "Hi, I'm Lucas." He stuck out his hand with grave formality. "It's nice to meet you." Charlotte shook his small hand, surprised by the firmness of his grip. "It's nice to meet you too, Lucas. Thank you for the drawing. It was beautiful." Lucas's face flushed with pride. "Did you really like it? Dad said you kept it in your desk." "I did. It's one of my favorite things in my office. Even though it's just stick figures, I'm not very good at drawing people. I think it's perfect exactly as it is." Charlotte found herself smiling genuinely for the first time in days. "The sun is particularly well done." Lucas beamed and climbed into the chair across from her. Ethan followed more slowly, his expression caught between amusement and something that looked like hope. "What do you want for lunch, buddy?" Ethan asked. "Grilled cheese and tomato soup, and can I get a cookie too?" "Let's see how much of the grilled cheese you eat first." Lucas turned back to Charlotte with unfiltered curiosity. "Dad says you're his boss. Does that mean you tell him what to do all day?" "Sometimes, but your dad is very good at his job, so mostly I just trust him to do what needs to be done." "He works a lot," Lucas said matter-of-factly. "Like a lot, but he said you gave him days off to spend with me. That was really nice." Charlotte felt her chest tighten. "Your dad deserved time off. He works very hard. Because of me, right? He has to work hard to take care of me." The observation was delivered without self-pity, just a child's understanding of his world. Charlotte glanced at Ethan, who had gone very still. "He works hard because he loves you," Charlotte said carefully, "and because he wants to give you a good life. But that's not a burden, Lucas. That's a privilege." Lucas considered this seriously. "What do you work for? Dad says you don't have kids." "Lucas," Ethan said quietly, warning in his voice. "What? You said she doesn't." Charlotte laughed, surprised by the sound. "It's okay. You're right. I don't have kids. I work because I built a company, and I want it to be successful." "Is it successful?" "Yes." "Then why do you still work so much? If you already won, I mean." The question was innocent, but it cut straight to the heart of everything Charlotte had been wrestling with. Why did she still work so much? What was she trying to prove? Who was she trying to impress? "That's a very good question," Charlotte said softly. "I'm not sure I have a good answer. Dad says sometimes grown-ups don't know the answers either, that it's okay to be confused." "Your dad is very wise." "I know." Lucas swung his legs under the table, completely at ease. "Are you lonely? You look lonely." "Lucas!" Ethan's voice was sharper now. "That's not an appropriate question." But Charlotte held up a hand. "It's all right." She met Lucas's clear, honest gaze. "Yes, sometimes I am lonely." "Because you work so much you don't have time for friends?" "Something like that." Lucas nodded sagely. "That's what I thought. That's why I drew you the picture, so you'd know someone was thinking about you." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. This child, this beautiful, insightful child, had seen through to the core of her in a way no adult ever had cared enough to draw her a picture so she'd feel less alone. "Thank you," she whispered. "That was very kind." The waitress arrived with their food, breaking the moment. Lucas immediately dove into his grilled cheese, getting melted cheese on his face within seconds. Ethan handed him a napkin with practiced ease. "So what do you do at your company?" Lucas asked between bites. "Like, what does a boss actually do all day?" Charlotte found herself explaining logistics and supply chains and shipping routes in terms an 8-year-old could understand. Lucas listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was actually paying attention. "So you're like a puzzle solver," he said finally. "You figure out how to get things from one place to another in the best way possible." "That's exactly right." "Cool. I like puzzles. Dad got me a 1,000-piece one for my birthday. Have you finished it yet?" "Not yet, but I'm working on it. Dad helps me sometimes after dinner if he's home." Lucas glanced at his father with unmistakable love. He's really good at finding the edge pieces. Charlotte watched the exchange between father and son, the easy affection, the simple joy they took in each other's company. This was what she'd been missing, this connection, this purpose beyond profit. "Do you have hobbies?" Lucas asked, returning his attention to Charlotte. "Like things you do just for fun?" Charlotte opened her mouth, then closed it. What did she do for fun? When was the last time she'd done anything just because it brought her joy? "I used to paint," she heard herself say. "A long time ago. In college." "Why'd you stop?" "I got busy with work. Didn't have time anymore." Lucas frowned. "That's sad. You should paint again. Dad says it's important to do things that make you happy, not just things you're supposed to do." "Your dad is full of good advice." "I know. He's pretty smart." Lucas took a sip of his soup. "You should come have dinner with us sometime. Then you wouldn't be lonely and Dad wouldn't have to work late and we could all hang out." The invitation was so casual, so genuine, that Charlotte didn't know how to respond. She looked at Ethan, who seemed equally surprised. "That's very sweet, Lucas," Charlotte managed. "But I'm sure your dad wants to spend his free time with you, not with his boss." "But you're not just his boss. You're his friend now, right?" Lucas looked between them. "That's what friends do. They have dinner together." "Lucas," Ethan said gently, "Charlotte is very busy. She just said she's lonely. Lonely people need friends." Lucas's logic was unassailable. "And Dad needs friends too. He never has anyone over except Aunt Maria." Charlotte felt something warm bloom in her chest. "I would like that very much, if it's okay with your dad." Ethan met her eyes across the table, and something passed between them. Understanding, connection. The acknowledgement that whatever this was, it had moved beyond professional boundaries into something more complicated and infinitely more valuable. "Friday night?" Ethan offered. "Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and whatever vegetables I can convince Lucas to eat." "I don't like broccoli," Lucas informed Charlotte seriously, "in case you were wondering." "Noted. I'll bring dessert." Lucas's eyes lit up. "What kind?" "What's your favorite?" "Chocolate chip cookies. The big soft ones with lots of chips." "Then chocolate chip cookies it is." The rest of lunch passed in easy conversation. Lucas told Charlotte about school, about his best friend Tyler who could burp the alphabet, about the science fair project he was planning on volcanoes. He asked Charlotte about her favorite foods and colors, and whether she preferred dogs or cats. Simple questions. Normal questions. The kind of conversation Charlotte had spent 15 years avoiding because they felt like wastes of time. Now they felt like lifelines. When lunch ended and they stood to leave, Lucas surprised Charlotte by wrapping his arms around her waist in a spontaneous hug. "I'm glad we're friends now," he said, his voice muffled against her sweater. Charlotte stood frozen for a moment, then carefully put her arms around the small boy. "Me too, Lucas. Me too." Walking back to her car, Charlotte felt lighter than she had in years. She'd been terrified of meeting Lucas, afraid she'd say something wrong or fail to connect. Instead, she'd found an 8-year-old boy with more emotional intelligence than most adults she knew. A boy who'd seen her loneliness and responded with kindness. A boy who'd offered friendship without condition or agenda. Back at the office, Charlotte found herself unable to focus on work. She kept thinking about Lucas's questions, about painting and hobbies, and doing things just for joy, about the life she'd set aside in pursuit of success. At 4 o'clock, she made a decision. Charlotte left the office and drove to an art supply store she passed every day but had never entered. Inside, the smell of paint and canvas and possibility overwhelmed her. She wandered the aisles, touching brushes and tubes of paint, remembering the girl she'd been 20 years ago. The one who'd dreamed of art school before practicality won out. She bought canvas and paints and brushes and an easel. More than she needed, more than was practical. Enough to start again. The saleswoman rang up her purchases with a knowing smile. "Starting a new hobby?" Restarting an old one, Charlotte corrected. Even better. Good luck. Charlotte carried her supplies up to her penthouse and set them up by the window with the city view. She didn't paint that night, just arranged everything, getting reacquainted with the feel of brushes in her hand, the weight of possibility. But tomorrow, maybe. Tomorrow she might try. The next 2 days passed in a strange new rhythm. Charlotte implemented her policy changes despite continued resistance from parts of her executive team. She held firm when Jennifer tried to water down the vacation requirements and refused to budge when David suggested exemptions for senior staff. She also left at 6 p.m. both days. And she didn't work either evening. Instead, she had dinner with Sarah via video call one night, laughing at stories about her friend's chaotic household. The next night, she set up her easel and stared at blank canvas for an hour before finally making the first tentative brushstroke. It was terrible, objectively awful. But it was also the most honest thing Charlotte had created in years. Friday evening arrived with a flutter of nerves Charlotte hadn't felt since her first board presentation. She'd spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing an outfit, casual but not too casual, approachable but not trying too hard, before settling on dark jeans and a soft green sweater. She'd made chocolate chip cookies from scratch, burning the first batch before getting the second one right. They sat in a container on her passenger seat as she drove to the address Ethan had provided. The house was in a quiet neighborhood of modest homes with small yards and basketball hoops over garage doors. Nothing like Charlotte's downtown penthouse. This was where families lived, where children played in the streets and neighbors knew each other's names. Charlotte parked and sat in her car for a moment, gathering courage. Through the lit window, she could see movement inside, hear the faint sound of music. She grabbed the cookies and walked to the front door. Lucas answered before she could knock, his face splitting into that infectious grin. "You came. Dad said you might be too busy, but you came." "I wouldn't miss it." Charlotte held out the cookies. "As promised." "Yes, Dad, she brought cookies. The big soft ones." Ethan appeared behind Lucas, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He wore jeans and a faded blue Henley, his hair slightly mussed. He looked younger, more relaxed, more like the man she'd seen at the pizza restaurant. "Welcome," he said warmly. "Come in." "Sorry about the mess. Lucas's idea of cleaning his room is shoving everything under the bed." "I did clean it, mostly." Charlotte stepped inside and immediately felt the difference. This wasn't a showplace. It was a home. There were shoes by the door and a coat rack overstuffed with jackets, and a small table covered in Lucas's drawings and school papers. The living room held a worn couch and mismatched chairs and shelves full of books and toys. It was lived in, loved, real. "Can I show you my room?" Lucas asked eagerly. "I have my volcano project set up and the puzzle Dad got me." "Lucas, let Charlotte breathe for a second," Ethan said, amused. "It's okay. I'd love to see your room." Lucas grabbed her hand and dragged her down a short hallway to a small bedroom painted blue. Star stickers covered the ceiling. Posters of planets and rockets decorated the walls. The promised puzzle sat half-finished on a desk next to a model volcano that looked professionally built. "Did you make this?" Charlotte asked, genuinely impressed. "Dad helped with the hard parts, but I did the painting and the research." Lucas launched into an enthusiastic explanation of volcanic eruptions and lava flows and magma chambers. Charlotte listened, asking questions, and somewhere in the middle of learning about pyroclastic flows, she realized she was happy. Genuinely, unexpectedly happy. Dinner was chaotic and wonderful. The spaghetti was slightly overcooked, and Lucas complained about the salad, and the conversation jumped from topic to topic with no linear logic. But there was laughter, there was warmth, there was the kind of easy comfort Charlotte had never experienced. "So Charlotte," Lucas said, twirling spaghetti on his fork with questionable success, "are you still lonely?" "Lucas!" Ethan looked mortified. "What? I'm just asking." Charlotte smiled. "Not right now. Right now I'm having dinner with friends." "Good," Lucas nodded with satisfaction. "You should come over more. Then you'd be lonely less." "I'd like that." After dinner, they played a board game that Lucas won through a combination of luck and questionable rule interpretation. Then it was bedtime, and Charlotte stood awkwardly in the living room while Ethan took Lucas to brush his teeth. She studied the photos on the walls. Lucas as a baby. Lucas's first day of school. Lucas and Ethan at what looked like a baseball game, both wearing matching jerseys and huge smiles. A whole life documented in frames. A whole life she'd never known existed. "He wants you to say goodnight," Ethan said, returning to the living room. Charlotte followed him to Lucas's room where the boy sat in bed wearing dinosaur pajamas, his hair still damp from washing. "Good night, Lucas," Charlotte said softly. "Will you come back?" he asked, his voice small in the darkened room. "If you'd like me to." "I would. I think you're nice. And I think Dad likes having you here, too." Charlotte glanced at Ethan, who had the grace to look embarrassed. "I like being here," Charlotte said honestly. "Thank you for inviting me." "That's what friends do," Lucas yawned. "Good night, Charlotte." "Good night." Back in the living room, Charlotte and Ethan stood in awkward silence for a moment. "Thank you for tonight," Charlotte said finally. "It meant more than you probably realize." "Lucas is right, you know. You're welcome here any time." Ethan moved to the kitchen and started clearing dishes. Charlotte followed automatically, helping without being asked. They worked in companionable silence, falling into a rhythm of washing and drying. It felt strangely intimate, this domestic routine in Ethan's small kitchen. "I've been thinking about what you said," Charlotte said quietly, "about modeling the behavior I want to see, about being vulnerable. And I hate it. It's terrifying. Every instinct I have screams at me to maintain control and distance and professional boundaries." Charlotte set down the dish she was drying. "But I also don't want to be lonely anymore. I don't want to be 43 years old with a corner office and an empty life." Ethan turned to face her, his hands still wet from dishwater. "What do you want?" "I don't know exactly, but I think it looks something like this. Like dinner with people who care about me. Like conversations that matter. Like being someone's friend, not just their boss." Charlotte took a breath. "Like having a reason to leave work at 6 p.m. Those are good wants. I don't know how to build them. I've spent so long building the company that I don't know how to build relationships. Start where you are, with what you have." Ethan dried his hands on the towel. "You had dinner here tonight. That's a start. You're trying to change your company culture. That's a start. You bought painting supplies. Yes, I noticed the paint under your fingernails today. That's a start." Charlotte looked down at her hands, at the tiny fleck of blue paint she'd missed washing off. "You notice everything." "It's my job to notice things about you." "Is that all it is? Your job?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them had acknowledged until now. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "At first, yes. You were my boss. I was your assistant. The boundaries were clear." He met her eyes. "But somewhere along the way, especially this past week, it's become more complicated." "Complicated how?" "Complicated like I find myself caring about whether you're lonely. Complicated like I want you to be happy, not just productive. Complicated like having you here tonight felt right in a way that has nothing to do with professional relationships." Charlotte's heart hammered in her chest. "Ethan, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know the position we're in, boss and employee, single father and CEO. The power dynamics alone make it complicated. I'm just being honest about where things stand for me." "And where do they stand?" Ethan smiled sadly. "Somewhere between appropriate and impossible. I care about you, Charlotte, more than I probably should. But I also have Lucas to think about. And my job. And the fact that office romances between bosses and subordinates rarely end well." Charlotte absorbed this, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. "You're right. About all of it. The power dynamics, the complications, the impossibility." She paused. "But that doesn't change the fact that I care about you too. Both of you. That tonight was the happiest I've been in years. What do we do with that?" "I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe we just acknowledge it exists and figure out how to navigate it." Charlotte moved closer. "I don't want to lose this. Whatever this is. Your friendship. Lucas's. The feeling of being welcomed into your home. But I also don't want to make things complicated for you. Life is already complicated. Maybe we just take it slow. See where things go naturally instead of forcing anything. I can do slow. Can you?" Ethan's smile was gentle. "You built a $2 billion company in 15 years. Patience isn't exactly your strong suit. Then I'll learn. You're teaching me lots of things I'm bad at. What's one more? They stood in the kitchen, close enough to touch but maintaining careful distance, and Charlotte felt something shift inside her. This wasn't the dramatic transformation she'd expected. There was no grand gesture, no movie moment resolution, just two people trying to navigate something new and complicated and real, just the beginning of something that might, eventually, become more. I should go, Charlotte said finally. It's getting late. Okay. Ethan walked her to the door. Thank you for coming tonight, for making the effort. Lucas will talk about this for days. What about you? I'll think about it longer than that. Charlotte smiled and stepped out into the cool October night. She paused on the front step and turned back. Ethan, thank you for everything, for being honest, for being patient with me while I figure this out, for showing me what actually matters. You're figuring it out faster than you think. Charlotte drove home through quiet streets, her mind full of the evening. Lucas's enthusiasm, Ethan's honesty, the warmth of being in a home that felt lived in and loved. The possibility that maybe she could have more than just her company. The following week settled into a new pattern. Charlotte implemented her policy changes with iron will, pushing back against resistance and modeling the behavior she expected. She left at 6 p.m. most nights. She took her first full weekend off in 5 years. She sent fewer emails after hours and started measuring success by output instead of FaceTime. The company didn't collapse. In fact, productivity increased as employees, shocked by the cultural shift, started actually using their time more efficiently. Turnover dropped. Satisfaction scores rose. The data proved what Charlotte had suspected. Burned-out employees weren't effective employees. She had dinner at Ethan and Lucas's house most Friday nights, becoming part of their routine. She learned about Lucas's school friends and helped with homework and listened to enthusiastic recaps of soccer games. She and Ethan talked about everything, books and movies and childhood memories and dreams for the future. They didn't talk about what was growing between them. They didn't need to. It was there in the way Ethan smiled when she arrived, in the way Lucas included her in his drawings, in the small moments of connection that felt more real than any business deal Charlotte had ever closed. She started painting again, setting up her easel by the window and working on Saturday mornings. The paintings were still amateurish, but they were honest. She was creating something for joy instead of profit. Sarah came to visit one weekend, meeting Charlotte for coffee and catching up on 20 years of missed friendship. They made plans to stay in touch regularly, to actually prioritize the relationship instead of letting it fade again. Charlotte joined a book club feeling absurdly nervous at the first meeting. But the women were welcoming and the discussions were engaging, and for 2 hours a month, she was just Charlotte, not the CEO. Small changes, small connections, small moments of being human instead of being a machine, and slowly, imperceptibly, the loneliness that had defined Charlotte's life began to ease. 3 months after that night at the pizza restaurant, Charlotte found herself in Ethan's backyard on a Saturday afternoon, watching Lucas play with kids from the neighborhood. Ethan stood beside her, both of them holding coffee mugs, comfortable in the silence. "You look different," Ethan observed. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you're not carrying the weight of the world anymore." Charlotte considered this. "I delegated some of the weight. Turns out I don't have to carry it all myself." Revolutionary concept. "Who knew?" Charlotte smiled. "I gave Marcus full authority over the Singapore expansion. Promoted Jennifer to COO so she can handle more of the day-to-day operations. I'm learning to trust my team." "How does it feel?" "Terrifying, but also liberating." Charlotte watched Lucas score a goal and throw his arms up in triumph. "I have time now for painting and dinners and book club and afternoons watching 8-year-olds play soccer. I didn't know how much I was missing until I made space for it." Ethan bumped her shoulder gently. "Proud of you." "For what?" "Finally figuring out what most people know instinctively?" "For being willing to change. For admitting you were wrong. For choosing people over profit." Ethan's voice was soft. "That takes real courage." Charlotte turned to face him. "I couldn't have done it without you, without that night at Sal's Pizza when I saw what actually matters. Without Lucas reminding me that lonely people need friends." She paused. "Without you being patient while I figured out how to be human." You were always human, Charlotte. You just forgot for a while." Lucas came running over, flushed and breathless. "Did you see my goal? Did you see it?" "I saw it!" Charlotte high-fived him. "That was amazing. We're going to play another game. Want to join? We need even teams." Charlotte looked down at her jeans and sweater, at the grass stains she'd inevitably get, at the complete departure from the polished CEO image she'd maintained for 15 years. "Yeah," she said, grinning. "I want to join." She spent the next hour running around the backyard with children, laughing harder than she had in years, completely unconcerned with her appearance or dignity or anything except the simple joy of playing. When the game ended and the neighborhood kids scattered home, Charlotte collapsed on the grass beside Lucas, both of them breathing hard. "You're pretty good at soccer," Lucas said admiringly, "for a grown-up." "Thanks. You're pretty good too. For someone who's 8, Lucas giggled and sat up. "Charlotte, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you going to marry my dad?" Charlotte nearly choked on air. "What?" "Lucas, that's not... We're just friends." "But you like him, right? And he likes you, I can tell." "It's more complicated than that, buddy." "Why?" Lucas's eyes were genuinely curious. "If you like each other and you make each other happy, why is it complicated?" Charlotte looked at this 8-year-old boy with his uncomplicated view of the world and felt something settle in her chest. "You know what? You're absolutely right. It shouldn't be complicated." That night, after Lucas went to bed, Charlotte and Ethan sat on the back porch drinking wine and watching stars appear in the clearing sky. "Lucas asked me today if I was going to marry you," Charlotte said without preamble. Ethan choked on his wine. "He what?" "Don't worry, I didn't give him a definitive answer," Charlotte smiled. "But it got me thinking about what we're doing, about why we've been dancing around this for 3 months. Because it's complicated. Is it? Or have we just convinced ourselves it is?" Charlotte turned to face him. "You're not my assistant anymore, Ethan. As of last week when you accepted the VP of Strategic Operations position. We're peers now, colleagues at the same level. You created that position for me. I created it because you're brilliant at operations and the company needs someone in that role. The fact that it solves our power dynamic issue is just a happy coincidence." Ethan shook his head, laughing. "You're unbelievable. You restructured your entire executive team partly to eliminate workplace complications between us." "I restructured my executive team because it needed restructuring. You taking the VP role and us being on equal footing is just good organizational planning." Charlotte's smile was mischievous. "The fact that it means I can do this without it being inappropriate is purely a side benefit." She leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft and tentative and absolutely right. When they pulled apart, Ethan was smiling. "You know Lucas is probably watching from his bedroom window." "Let him. He asked if I was going to marry you. Might as well give him some evidence we're headed in that direction." "Are we?" Charlotte took his hand. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it, both of you. I know that Friday dinners with you and Lucas are the highlight of my week. I know I care about you in a way that has nothing to do with professional relationships and everything to do with who you are as a person." "I love you," Ethan said simply. "I've probably loved you since you showed up at Lucas's birthday dinner looking confused and vulnerable and completely unlike the CEO I thought I knew. But I was afraid to say it because of all the complications. Life is complicated. That doesn't mean we can't navigate it together." Charlotte squeezed his hand. "I love you too. I love Lucas. I love the life you've built and the man you are and the way you made me remember how to be human." They sat together on the porch as night settled in around them, holding hands and making plans and imagining possibilities. Inside, Lucas was probably still awake, probably still watching, probably grinning at his successful matchmaking. Charlotte thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, alone in her penthouse, measuring success in profit margins, building an empire while forgetting to build a life. That woman wouldn't recognize who she'd become. She had a corner office and a billion-dollar company, but now she also had Friday night dinners and Saturday morning painting and a book club that met monthly. She had a friend she'd reconnected with and employees who actually used their vacation time. She had paintings drying by her window and grass stains on her jeans and the kind of exhaustion that came from playing soccer with 8-year-olds instead of working 70-hour weeks. She had Ethan's hand in hers and Lucas's drawing in her desk and the possibility of a future that looked nothing like the one she'd planned. She had a life. A real, messy, complicated, beautiful life. Charlotte looked up at the stars scattered across the October sky and felt something she hadn't felt in 15 years. Complete. Not because she'd achieved every professional goal or dominated her industry or built something that would last generations. Because she'd finally understood what Lucas had known all along. Behind every person was a whole life you couldn't see. Behind every employee was a family, struggles, dreams, hopes. Behind every professional facade was a human being who needed connection and rest and purpose beyond profit margins. Charlotte had spent 15 years looking at people and seeing only what they could do for her company. Now she looked at Ethan and saw the man she loved. She looked at Lucas and saw the boy who'd taught her about friendship. She looked at her employees and saw human beings deserving of dignity and balance and lives beyond their job descriptions. The company still mattered. Success still mattered. But people mattered more. And that simple truth, the truth an 8-year-old had shown her in a small pizza restaurant, had changed everything. Charlotte Hayes had built an empire, but she'd finally learned that the real victory wasn't in the building. It was in finding someone to share it with. It was in having a reason to leave work at 6 p.m. It was in being loved for who she was, not what she could provide. It was in stick figure drawings and chocolate chip cookies and grass-stained jeans. It was in being human instead of just being a CEO. And as Charlotte sat on that back porch holding Ethan's hand while Lucas watched from his window and stars appeared overhead, she realized something profound. She'd finally won the only game that really mattered. She wasn't lonely anymore.